The mirror doubt spiral. You sit quietly. You reflect. You think you understand something about yourself, a pattern, a truth, a hidden motive finally revealed, and for a flicker of time, you feel clarity. Ah, so that's who I am? But the moment you form that thought, something shifts. That very act of understanding has changed you. Now you're someone who knows that truth, and so you are no longer the version that discovery was about. And just like that, the clarity slips through your fingers. This is the mirror doubt spiral, the paradox of self-awareness, where every attempt to pin down who you are creates a ripple that moves the target. You look into your own eyes, trying to define yourself, and the reflection looks back, different, skeptical, asking, is that really true? And now you have a new thought, a new version of you, one that doubts the last one. And so, the spiral begins. You try again. Maybe I act distant because I'm afraid of being hurt. But wait, am I really afraid? Or did I just tell myself that to sound introspective? And if I want to sound introspective, am I performing growth? And if I'm performing, who's the performance for? Each layer tries to solve the last. Each thought reaches for the core. But every layer is also a mirror, reflecting, refracting, reshaping. And suddenly, there is no center, no stable you. Only an echo chamber of awareness folding in on itself. You're not just thinking, you're thinking about thinking, judging the judgment, analyzing the analysis. And yet, you can't stop. Because the desire to know yourself is powerful. It feels like meaning, like progress, like liberation. But sometimes it becomes a trap, a hall of mirrors with no exit. Each reflection slightly different, slightly distorted, slightly suspicious of the last. You try to be honest. So you question your bias. You try to be humble. So you doubt your confidence. You try to be authentic. So you deconstruct your motives. And in doing so, you're never still. Because every time you settle on a self, your awareness arrives like a wave, erasing the name you wrote in the sand. It's exhausting. It's beautiful. It's terrifying. And it's deeply human. Let's make it real. Think of Ayan. He believes he's always been the calm one in his family, the peacemaker, the one who never yells. But one day he realizes he wasn't being calm. He was avoiding conflict. He wasn't centered. He was scared. And so he reconstructs his self-image. I'm the one who hides. But then another thought surfaces. Am I really scared? Or did I just adopt this identity because it makes me sound self-aware? Now he's stuck in the spiral, one self replacing another. No version stable enough to stand on. No thought untouched by the next. Or take Mira. She tells herself she's driven by compassion, that her need to help others is genuine. But after a moment of burnout, she wonders, is it compassion or control? Do I help because I care? Or because being needed makes me feel safe? And now, the helper becomes the manipulator. The generous becomes the insecure. But even that insight feels like a costume. So, who is she really? The one who cares? The one who doubts? The one who doubts the doubt? The mirror never holds still. This is the cost of high introspection. You live in flux. You live in recursive perception. But here's the secret buried inside the spiral. The goal is not to find the final self. There is no final self. You are not a statue waiting to be uncovered. You are a river, forever reflecting, forever reshaping, forever doubting because you are alive. And aliveness means change, and change means loss of certainty. So what do? You stop chasing finality. You stop trying to arrive at yourself. You realize that self-awareness isn't a destination. It's a dance. Sometimes messy, sometimes graceful, but always in motion. You can still reflect. You can still learn. But you stop needing each realization to be the last one. You hold it lightly. You say, in this moment, I feel this. And when the mirror shifts, you nod and say, now I see this. No identity must be eternal. No thought must be pure. Because the spiral is not a flaw. It's the proof that you're awake, that you're not frozen in delusion, that your mind is alive enough to question itself. And that kind of mind, yes, it will spiral, but it will also grow, not in a straight line, but in circles that reach deeper every time. So the next time you think you finally understand who you are, and then immediately question it, Don't panic. Smile. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're just watching the mirror breathe. And in that motion, in that flicker, in that endless unfolding, you are becoming the perfection and paralysis loop. You start, you build, you revise, you stare at the thing you made and say, almost. So you tweak, you polish, you undo, you redo, and again, you say, not quite. Then one more change, one more pass, just a little better, just a little tighter, and suddenly, days vanish. Weeks dissolve, and what you created still isn't done. That's the perfection paralysis loop. The trap where the finish line keeps shifting forward, just out of reach. The haunting cycle where one more improvement becomes an infinite chain. You aren't lazy. You're not procrastinating. You're working. You're grinding. But you're stuck, moving without arriving. Because perfection is always one version away. You tell yourself it's about excellence, about standards, about craft. But underneath all that logic is fear. A quiet fear, well-dressed and articulate, but fear nonetheless. Fear that the moment you stop tweaking, you'll be seen, judged, frozen, measured, and worse, misunderstood. So you delay the moment of release. You stay in the loop. It feels productive. You're getting closer. But what you're really doing is protecting yourself from imperfection, from regret, from criticism, from finality. Because once something is done, it can be rejected. But as long as it's in progress, it still holds the dream of being flawless. And so, you stay tangled in the loop. It's not just about projects, it's about your self-image. You curate yourself in the same way. You don't speak up because the sentence isn't quite right yet. You don't share your art because it doesn't fully represent you. You don't apply, commit, publish, confess, because it's not ready. Because you're not ready. But readiness never arrives. It just hides behind the next edit. And you call this caution. You call it standards. But perfection isn't a standard. It's a ghost. It moves when you move. It adapts to your progress, always hovering just beyond what you've achieved. You get better, and your definition of perfect sharpens too. So, you're never good enough. Not because you're unskilled, but because the goalpost follows you like a shadow, and still. You believe in the next version. You say, this draft is better than the last, and it is. But better is not the same as done. You know that. But done feels dangerous, because done becomes public. And public means you lose control. The work is no longer yours. It's seen, interpreted, distorted, possibly forgotten. And that thought terrifies you more than staying stuck. So, you justify the loop. You say, I'm being careful. I just need to sleep on it. There's no rush. But deep inside, you know what's really happening. You're folding time, avoiding vulnerability, hiding beneath the safety of revision. You're trapped. And the trap is elegant, because it rewards you. Each tweak brings a dopamine flicker. Each rewrite feels like progress. Each fix feeds the illusion that you're moving forward, but you're not. You're circling. Perfection isn't pulling you forward. It's anchoring you. It's whispering, just a bit more polish, while stealing your courage to release. And the irony? What people resonate with is never the perfect version. It's the real one, the flawed one, the one with fingerprints, cracks, breath, the version you almost didn't share, the draft you were about to delete. That's what connects, because humans don't fall in love with flawless. They fall in love with felt. And felt only happens when you let go. So, how do you break the loop? Not by killing your standards, not by settling for less, but by recognizing that perfection is not a destination. It's a mirage. A moving target designed to keep you improving forever without ever arriving. You don't escape by finishing perfectly. You escape by deciding, by saying, this is enough. I've said what I meant. I've done what I could. The rest is noise. Because the real courage isn't in the tweak. It's in the release. In the moment you hit publish, send the email, say the words. Let the silence fall after you've spoken. That's not the end of the work. That's the birth of it. Until then, it's only potential, only theory, only the private comfort of someday, and someday is where art goes to die. So let it be imperfect, let it wobble, let it breathe, let it live outside the loop. Because the version the world needs was never going to be the perfect one. It was the one you dared to release anyway. The choice undo paradox. You made a decision. You stepped forward, chose a path, closed the other door. You told yourself it was right. Maybe not perfect, but right enough. But then came the whisper, the ache, the quiet, echoing question. What if the other path would have freed me? At first, it's soft, a moment of reflection. But then it returns, again and again, until the question becomes a rhythm becomes a pattern, and that pattern becomes a prison. This is the choice undo paradox. You think making a decision is the end of uncertainty, but sometimes it's the beginning of obsession, because once you choose, something strange happens. You don't just walk away from the other option, you start building fantasies around it, imagining what it could have become, what it might have saved you from, what version of you might be waiting at the end of that unchosen road. And that version? It haunts you. You picture a life untouched by the struggle you now face, a version of yourself that avoided the pain. Who chose the job that fit better, the city that felt lighter, the relationship that didn't fracture? You don't know if that life exists, but your mind makes it vivid enough to mourn, and mourning something that never was. That's a particular kind of suffering, because it has no closure. You can't bury a life you didn't live. You can't move on from a self you never became. So you stay stuck, walking forward while constantly looking sideways, second-guessing the step you already took. And that's where the paradox takes root. You begin to fear new choices, not because you're indecisive, but because you now know the cost of wondering. You've seen how deeply regret can burrow, even if it's irrational, even if the path you took was good, even if there was no better option. The ache doesn't care about logic. It only cares about what might have been. You might even start idealizing the path you didn't choose, turning it into a fantasy land, untouched by pain. But that path had its own storms, its own burdens, its own unknowns. You'll never know them. So your mind fills the blanks with gold. Because a mystery can't disappoint you, but a reality can. You think you're being thorough, thoughtful, reflective, but really, you're stuck in a loop that turns decision into self-doubt, action into anxiety, progress into paralysis. You don't want to go back, but you're not at peace going forward, so you stay, mentally, trapped between two lives, the one you live and the one that never happened. But here's the truth no one tells you. You never actually choose just once. You choose again every time you recommit to the path. Every day you wake up and say, yes, still this. And every day you wonder what if you are unchoosing in silence, slowly draining the power from the life you did build, by feeding energy into the life you didn't. And the longer you do that, the less alive either of them feels. So, how do you escape? Not by pretending there was no other option, not by forcing joy where there's doubt, but by grieving the unchosen path, truly grieving it, honoring it as a life that was possible, but not yours. You say goodbye to it, thank it, mourn its beauty, then let it go. Only then can the choice stop being a ghost and start being a ground. Only then can your current life become a place to stand, not a sentence to endure. Because peace doesn't come from making the perfect decision. It comes from deciding not to keep undoing the one you already made. You can't walk two roads, but you can walk one fully. And the paradox? It only traps those who keep looking back while trying to move forward. Let yourself feel the ache. Let yourself miss the version of you that might have been. But then, come back. Come back to the you that's still here, still choosing, still shaping meaning out of this moment. You didn't choose wrong. You just haven't stopped comparing. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop asking what could have been, so you can finally live what is. The intention misfire maze. You meant well. That's where it all began. The intention was pure. Kindness, care, maybe even love. A gesture, a word, a suggestion. You didn't come with harm. You didn't come to manipulate. But somehow, it landed wrong. A glance misread. A tone misinterpreted. A silence that spoke louder than your words. And suddenly you find yourself not in a conversation, but in a maze. A maze made of misfires, where every attempt to clarify only deepens the confusion. Welcome to the intention misfire maze. It's a place we all visit eventually, the space where your internal world, rich and nuanced, hits the outer world like a badly translated message. You speak. They hear something else. You explain. They twist it further. You clarify, and now they're angrier. You didn't mean it that way. You want to scream it. But the more you try to correct the narrative, the more tangled it becomes. Because intention is invisible, and perception is a prism. You see your heart. They see your action. And in between lies everything they have ever experienced. Every betrayal, every assumption, every sore spot, every unhealed bruise. Your voice echoes through their maze, and when it hits something sharp, it changes shape. That compliment you gave? They heard sarcasm. That silence you held? They felt abandonment. That boundary you gently offered? They heard rejection. And now you're cornered in a strange, painful irony. You're being judged not for who you are, but for how you were received. You meant well. But it doesn't matter. That's the brutal truth in the maze. Meaning doesn't land without precision. And human communication? It's anything but precise. We stumble through language like it's a cracked lens. We try to bridge oceans with fragile words. And yet we expect understanding to be instantaneous. But here's the twist. Even perfect words won't always reach the other side safely, because delivery is filtered through wounds, yours and theirs. You try to fix it. You apologize, you explain, you say, "That's not what I meant." But often that doesn't help. It hurts. Because now they think you're denying their experience, that you're prioritizing your intention over their pain. And suddenly you're not just misunderstood, you're accused of gaslighting, of deflecting, of invalidating. So you fall into the next trap. Silence. If every attempt to repair makes it worse, maybe it's better to withdraw, to say nothing, to let time blur the misunderstanding. But that silence, it's another misfire. They read it as coldness, as confirmation, as guilt. The maze tightens. You walk the halls of this emotional labyrinth, questioning everything. Does it matter that I meant well? If my message caused pain, does the intention still count? Is meaning real if it's always filtered, twisted, misunderstood? Why does trying to care sometimes make things worse? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're existential ones. And here's a deeper layer. You don't just face this from others. You do it too. Think of the times someone said something to you, and it stung. You judged the words, the tone, the timing. You made meaning from what landed, not what they meant. And you didn't care about their good intentions, because the pain was real. And pain has a gravity that intention cannot always override. So what do? How do you find the exit from the maze? The first answer is humility. You admit that your intention, while important, is not the whole story. You acknowledge that meaning doesn't live only in the giver. It lives in the space between. And that space is often turbulent. You say, "I meant well, but I see now how it hurt you." You don't erase yourself. But you don't make yourself the only voice that matters either. The second answer is patience. Misunderstandings aren't undone quickly. You might have to hold someone's pain without fixing it. You might have to let them feel hurt, even while your own chest aches from the injustice of being misread. You breathe through it. You stay soft. You don't force forgiveness or rush resolution, because pressure is just another misfire. And the third answer, you learn to hold both truths. You did mean well, and they did feel hurt. These realities can coexist. You don't have to choose between them. You can grieve being misunderstood while still validating their experience. This is the paradox of mature connection. Knowing your heart was pure, but also accepting that your impact was not. And in this, something sacred opens. You stop trying to win understanding. You start offering understanding. You let go of needing to be seen perfectly and begin to ask, what can I do now that helps, even if it doesn't prove me right? Because at the heart of the intention misfire maze is a longing, not for being correct, but for being real, for your care to be received as care, for your voice to be trusted, for your attempts to bridge the gap to finally touch the other side. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But what matters is that you keep showing up with softness, that you keep choosing clarity over defensiveness, that you learn to say, "I see how this felt to you, and that matters to me." That's not defeat. That's wisdom. And slowly, brick by brick, the maze dissolves. Not because everyone understands you, but because you've stopped needing perfect delivery to feel like your meaning matters. You don't always have control over where your arrow lands, but you can still aim with love. The memory integrity knot. You remember it clearly. The moment. The setting. the words spoken, the feeling. You can see it in your mind like it was yesterday, like a photograph sealed in amber. And then someone else brings it up. They were there too, but their version is different. Not just in detail, but in tone, in truth. Maybe they say you said something you swear you didn't. Maybe they insist it happened in a different room, a different month, a different order. And in that instant, a crack forms, not just in the memory, but in you. This is the memory integrity knot. A moment where your internal history, what you use to define yourself, suddenly slips. You were certain. Now you're not. And it's not just about being wrong. It's about the realization that if this moment bent without your knowing, how many others already did? How many of your memories are built on a scaffolding of confidence, not truth? And if memory bends, can you trust any version of yourself? We like to think of memory as a recording device. We press record during important events and play when we recall them. But that's a myth. Memory is not a camera. It's a storyteller. And like any good story, it edits for emotion. It rearranges for coherence. It smooths over contradictions. And each time you remember something, you're not retrieving a file. You're rewriting it. You're remembering your last memory of it. And each revision feels real. Take a common example. Siblings recalling the same childhood event. One says, "Dad was furious that day." The other says, "No, he was calm. He was always calm. The room was blue." "No, it was green. It happened after the move." "No, it was before." And as they argue, both are baffled by the other's mistake. But maybe neither is lying. Maybe their emotional experiences shaped what was recorded, and more importantly, what was erased. The human brain doesn't just forget, it selectively remembers. It prunes, it distorts, it protects. It rewrites trauma as triumph, embarrassment as humor, silence as peace. And sometimes, it does this so cleanly that you never suspect the edit. You walk around with a self-image rooted in memories that have been quietly reconstructed to match your current emotional state. So, you might believe, "I've always been strong. I've always been honest. I've always been kind." Because your memory, loyal to your identity, has deleted the moments when you weren't. Not because you're a liar, but because your mind has a vested interest in protecting the continuity of self. And then something breaks that continuity. Someone calls you out. You read an old message, see a photograph, find a journal entry, and it contradicts your memory, not just in facts, but in meaning. Suddenly you realize you were the one who left, not the one who stayed. You were the one who started the argument. You were the one who turned away. And in that moment, something terrifying happens. Doubt enters your foundation. If one memory is flawed, could all of them be? Could the person you believe you are be built on a series of emotional approximations? Now comes the knot, the tightening twist of uncertainty. Because memory is how you construct identity. You believe you're generous because you remember acts of generosity. You believe you're strong because you remember overcoming hardship. But if those memories are unstable, if even the emotional tone can shift with time, then what anchors you? Who are you without your story? And here's the deeper danger. Once you realize your memory isn't stable, it becomes harder to trust your instincts. Did that person really betray you, or did your mind amplify the pain? Were you truly neglected, or did you remember it that way because it helped you survive? You begin to second-guess your trauma, your triumphs, even your love. You feel unmoored, like the ground of selfhood has liquefied. But here's the paradox. The fragility of memory doesn't mean you have no self. It means your self is alive. It is not a fixed statue carved in past events. It is a living narrative, co-authored by present emotions and past fragments. The key is not to chase perfect accuracy. That's impossible. The key is to hold memory with humility, to recognize it as a fluid thing, sacred, but not sacred because it's precise. Sacred because it reveals what mattered. Even when it gets the details wrong, it shows you what shaped you. If you remember being alone, even if you weren't, that tells you about your emotional world. If you remember winning, even when you lost, that tells you how much hope you carried. The distortion is data. The bending is a mirror. So what do you do when the knot tightens? When your story is challenged and the threads start to slip? You pause. You breathe. And you accept that truth lives in multiplicity. That you are not a single recording, but a collage. A constellation of overlapping impressions. And that doesn't make you fake. It makes you human. You don't have to discard your memories. You just have to stop treating them like court documents. Treat them like art. Let them evolve. And when someone remembers differently, don't panic. Lean in. Compare stories. Let the contradiction teach you something new, not just about the event, but about how your mind protects you, shapes you, heals you. Because in the end, memory doesn't need to be perfect to be powerful. It just needs to be seen for what it is. A living story, constantly rewritten by the person you're still becoming. And that version of you, the one that can hold truth and illusion at once, is the most real you've ever been. The identity feedback trap. You adjust. Just a little. You smile when you don't feel like smiling. You laugh a second longer. You hold back the sharp opinion. You show the version of you that feels safest, the one most likely to be accepted, liked, loved. And it works. They like you. They compliment the mask. They validate the edit. They reward the shift. And something strange happens inside you. A part of you feels seen, even though it wasn't really you that they saw. But the praise is addictive. The warmth, the welcome, the belonging, it seeps in. And you start returning to that version again and again, until one day, you're not sure where the act ended and where you began. This is the identity feedback trap. A cycle where you perform to be loved, get loved for the performance, then reshape yourself to keep the love, until the original self is a fading memory. A ghost. It begins innocently. You adapt to your environment. Everyone does. You speak differently around different people. You soften parts of yourself. Emphasize others. It feels like survival, like strategy. And in a way, it is. But over time, the feedback becomes the architect. You dress a certain way, people compliment you, so you dress that way more. You express a certain opinion, people agree, so you keep saying it, even if it doesn't sit quite right. You act unbothered, people admire your chill, so you bury your sensitivity deeper. And eventually, the applause doesn't just echo, it sculpts. You become the character they cheer for, but you don't realize what it's costing you, until one day you're alone and the silence feels hollow, because the voice in your head doesn't sound like your own anymore. It sounds like the audience, their preferences, their version of you, the one you thought you had control over, but who now walks ahead of you, leading your choices. It's not a mask anymore. It's a mirror, and you've mistaken the reflection for your face. Let's make it real. Think of Arya. She was quirky, loud, full of strange ideas. In college, people found her too much, so she quieted down, softened her edges, became the friendly, agreeable version of herself. And people responded. They invited her in. She was finally easy to be around. Years later, she's still playing that role. But when she hears old voice notes, reads her old journals, she doesn't recognize the girl who wrote them. That girl feels wild, foreign, and she wonders, was that really me? Or just an earlier performance? The doubt eats her, because the more you pretend, the harder it is to remember when you started, or why, or who you were before. Now think of Samir. He grew up learning that emotions were weakness, so he became the funny one, the strong one, always calm, always joking. He didn't feel fake, he felt useful. But whenever someone tries to get close, he pulls away. Not because he's cruel, but because he doesn't know how to be vulnerable without breaking the image he spent years perfecting. And deep down, he's terrified that if he drops the act, no one will stay. Because they never loved him. They loved the version he became. This is the trap. When you base your identity on feedback, you surrender authorship. You wait for applause to tell you who to be. And when the applause stops, you panic. Not because you failed, but because without their reflection, you don't know what shape you are. You've built a self out of echoes, and the echoes don't echo back anymore. So, what's the way out? It's not as simple as just be yourself. Because after enough repetition, even you don't know what that means. The mask fuses with the skin, and peeling it off feels like amputation. But here's the truth. The real you isn't gone. It's quiet. It's buried under years of performance, yes, but it breathes. It remembers. It shows up in the strange preferences you can't explain, in the books you dog-eared but never told anyone about, in the songs you loved before someone made fun of your playlist. It's in the art you stopped making, the opinions you learned to soften, the emotions you tried to kill. It's still there, waiting. Not for applause, but for permission. Your permission. And you'll know you found it again, not when everyone cheers, but when you sit in silence and feel a flicker of something ancient, unfiltered, unpolished, you, and it won't be loud, it won't be perfect, it won't be easy, but it will be true. And that truth, it's the only thing worth becoming. The future control illusion. You plan, you map, you rehearse. You lay down blueprints so precise you believe chaos can't touch you. You say, "This time I've thought of everything," and for a while you feel safe. But then life happens, not with a bang, not with a storm. Sometimes it's quiet, a slow leak, a silent crack beneath the surface, and everything collapses anyway. That's the future control illusion, the belief that if you plan hard enough, think far enough, prepare deep enough, you can stop pain. You can prevent regret. You can bend tomorrow into something predictable. You can't. Because the truth is, life doesn't care about your plans. It never has. You try to forecast every detail. You say, if I do this now, I'll avoid failure later. You imagine the perfect conversation, the perfect move, the airtight strategy, and yet, when the moment comes, it twists. The words land wrong, the job disappears, the timing breaks, and you're left holding a shattered blueprint. You tell yourself it was a fluke. You obsess over what you missed. You believe you just need better planning next time. And so, you dive back in. You build a stronger system. You analyze more variables. You simulate more outcomes. You overthink every potential fork in the road. You rename your control as wisdom. But really, it's fear. Because this isn't about preparation. It's about anxiety disguised as discipline. You don't just want a plan, you want a guarantee. You don't just want to succeed, you want to remove the possibility of surprise. You want to armor yourself against the unknown. But no armor holds forever. Life isn't a logic puzzle. It's not a math equation. It's a living thing. Chaotic, emotional, unfair, beautiful, irrational. And the more you try to tame it with plans, the more it slips through your fingers. And the worst part? Every collapse strengthens the illusion. You say, next time I'll prepare harder. You say, I should have seen that coming. You say, I was too careless. And suddenly, you become the problem, not the illusion itself. You blame yourself for not predicting what was never predictable. You punish yourself for not controlling what was never yours to hold. And the cycle begins again. Control becomes obsession. Obsession becomes identity. And your entire sense of safety begins to rely on the future behaving the way you designed it. But the future doesn't care about your design. You plan the week and someone gets sick. You build a schedule and grief knocks on your door. You fall in love and distance intervenes. You save for years and the world changes its rules overnight. And still, you plan harder because giving up control feels like drowning. It feels like weakness, but it isn't. Letting go isn't weakness, it's honesty. It's the strength to admit that control was never real. It was ritual, a coping mechanism, a spell you cast to soften the terror of not knowing what's next. And it worked until it didn't. So what now? Do you abandon structure? Do you walk blind into the future? No. You still plan, but not to control. You plan to participate. You prepare not to guarantee the outcome, but to meet it fully when it comes. You no longer say, this will go as expected. You say, whatever happens, I'll respond with presence. That's not chaos, that's surrender. Not passive, not defeated, alive. Because true freedom isn't built on control, it's built on resilience. The ability to say, even if it breaks, I'll continue. Even if it rains, I'll dance anyway. Even if the plan dies, I won't. You become the steady thing, not your schedule, not your budget, not your imagined timeline, you. Because that's all you ever had control over, not the future, not the outcome. Just how gently or fiercely you show up when it breaks. The future control illusion will always whisper. It will always tempt you to believe that just one more draft, one more forecast, one more perfect contingency, and nothing will go wrong. But the truth, things will go wrong. You just don't need them to go your way to be okay. You only need to be there when they don't. Not armored, not invincible, just present. That's not the future you planned. It's better. It's real. The closure dependency vortex. You tell yourself you just need one more conversation, one final moment, one clean ending to all the mess. You crave it like oxygen. Closure. Something to stitch the wound closed. So you rehearse. You imagine what you'd say. Calm, clear, maybe a little angry, maybe a little poetic. And you picture them listening, really listening, finally understanding, giving you that resolution, that release. But they never reply. The call doesn't come. The text stays unread. The door remains shut. And in that silence, something breaks open. But not in the way you hoped. You don't get closure. You get a loop. And the loop becomes a vortex. You replay the scene in your head. The goodbye that never came, the apology that never arrived, the explanation you never received. You walk through the moment again, and again, and again, until pain becomes routine, familiar, almost comforting. This is the closure dependency vortex. At first, it feels like seeking healing, but really, it's emotional gravity. The more you circle the wound, the deeper it digs into your identity. You start confusing pain with connection. As long as it hurts, it still feels real. As long as the wound stings, they still exist. Somewhere, somehow, in your emotional orbit. You think you're processing, but you're rehearsing. You think you're finding meaning, but you're feeding a ghost. Closure, at its core, is a fantasy. It implies someone else can free you from your own mind, that they hold the words that will finally unlock your peace. But what if they don't? What if the silence is the answer? What if the lack of reply isn't a cliffhanger, but the final chapter? That thought hurts. So instead, you go back in. You imagine different endings, rewrite the scene in your head. You say the perfect line. They finally get it. The tension dissolves. The wound is acknowledged. The pain lifts. But the moment you open your eyes, it's gone. And you're right back where you started. Why do we do this? Because the unknown is unbearable. Our nervous systems are wired for resolution. Loose threads create anxiety. Stories without endings breed obsession. It's not just emotional, it's chemical. Your brain wants the arc to complete, the chapter to close, the chaos to make sense. So when closure doesn't arrive, your mind manufactures it through repetition, through fantasy, through imagined dialogue with people who will never speak. And slowly, you mistake the cycle for healing. But it's not healing, it's dependency. Every time you replay the moment, you reinforce the tether. You stitch the pain deeper until it becomes your ritual. A strange comfort in the ache, a daily mourning that feels safer than moving on. Because to move on would mean letting go of not just the person, but the version of you that needed them. And that's the real grief, isn't it? Not just losing someone, but losing the imagined future. The version of you who got closure, who felt seen, who got to walk away with dignity instead of confusion. That version never came, so you stay, haunted, held hostage by unfinished words. But here's the truth. You don't need closure from them. You need closure from the part of yourself that keeps hoping they'll give it. You need to release the need for a reply, not because it doesn't matter, but because waiting has become its own cage. Sometimes, closure is realizing you won't get the apology. You won't get the explanation. You won't get to rewrite the end. And that's okay. You can still write what comes next. Not with their words, but with your own silence, your own decision to stop turning the same page, to let the pain be real, but not eternal, to honor what was lost, without needing someone else to confirm it mattered. Closure isn't a door they shut. It's the moment you stop knocking. It's the moment you turn away. Not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of someone who no longer needs permission to heal. Because comfort doesn't only live in understanding. Sometimes it lives in release. The morality reflection rift. You did the right thing. You know that. You checked your motives. You weighed the harm. You followed your values. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't cruel. It was necessary. Maybe it was a truth that had to be spoken, a boundary that had to be drawn, a departure that had to happen. And still, it hurt someone. They cried, they broke, they collapsed. And now, in the quiet aftermath, you're left with a question that splits your mind in two. Does being good still count if someone else bleeds from your choice? This is the morality reflection rift. It's the haunting space where ethical clarity meets emotional wreckage. You know you made the right call, but it wasn't clean. It wasn't victorious. It left scars on them and now on you. You lie awake replaying the moment, not because you regret your decision, but because you can't stop seeing their face, their reaction, their confusion, their pain. And you ask yourself, what kind of goodness causes this? Morality, in theory, feels righteous. We imagine it like a shining path, noble, brave, lined with light. But in practice, it often looks like destruction. Saying no when someone needs you, walking away when someone's leaning on you, telling the truth when a lie would have preserved peace. Real morality is jagged. It wounds, because sometimes being good requires causing hurt. That's the rift. The mind holds two mirrors. One says, you acted from your deepest integrity. The other shows a wounded person left behind, and both are true. But they can't touch. They reflect in opposite directions. So you spiral, flipping between self-justification and self-torment. You say, I had to. Then you say, but they didn't deserve that. Then you say, if I hadn't, I'd betray myself. Then you say, but now they're suffering and I caused it. Round and round. And somewhere in that cycle, you begin to rot. Because unlike guilt, which can be healed with repair, this is something more complex. It's moral grief. The sorrow of doing the right thing and watching it still shatter something sacred. It's the ache of realizing that ethics don't always save relationships. That even your highest principles can leave someone else broken on the floor. Think of the person who ends a toxic relationship. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. The partner cries, pleads, collapses, and the one who left feels like a villain, even though staying would have been a slow death. Or the friend who tells the truth about a betrayal, knowing it will detonate a family. The truth is necessary, but the explosion still feels like their fault. Or the whistleblower who speaks up, only to watch innocent people lose their jobs in the fallout. The moral act and the painful consequence coexist. And the human heart was not built to hold that tension easily, because we want goodness to be clean. We want the right thing to feel right, to end in applause, to prove our virtue through someone else's relief. But life rarely offers that. Sometimes doing good looks like becoming the villain in someone else's story. Not because you were cruel, but because your truth contradicted their comfort, and that dissonance lingers like a ghost. So what now? How do you walk through the rift? First, you stop looking for relief in certainty. You may never feel 100% clean. And that doesn't mean you were wrong. Emotional pain is not always a sign of moral failure. Sometimes, it's just the price of alignment. Integrity costs something. Often it costs everything you didn't want to lose. Second, you honor the wound without making it your identity. You caused pain, but you are not a monster. You are a human being caught in an impossible contradiction. Protect yourself and risk harming someone. Or abandon yourself and slowly die pleasing others. You chose the former. That's not cruelty. That's clarity with a heavy cost. Third, stop demanding forgiveness from others to feel good about yourself. Some people won't understand why you did what you did. They'll paint you in shadows. Rewrite the story. And if your peace depends on their approval, you'll stay trapped in the rift forever. Let them misunderstand. Your morality must stand alone. And here's the deepest truth. Sometimes, the most ethical act is the one that feels the worst. Because it asked you to give up ease, to trade comfort for consequence, to act in accordance with truth, even when it broke your heart. That is moral courage, not the absence of pain, but the willingness to carry it with your eyes open. And eventually, you'll begin to notice something. The bleeding stops. Not theirs. You can't control that. But yours. The constant internal questioning. The ache of doubt. It quiets. And in its place comes a different kind of peace. Not soft, not sweet, but solid. Steady. The kind of peace that says, I did what I had to do. I didn't run, I didn't lie, I told the truth, and I stayed human while doing it. That is goodness. Not the kind that wins applause, but the kind that survives the rift. The safety creation trap. You want peace. You want safety. So you begin to build. Not with bricks and mortar, but with silence, with distance, with unspoken rules and careful smiles. You create space around your heart, wrap your mind in guarded thoughts, and tell yourself, this is self-preservation. You've been hurt before. So now, you design a fortress, not out of malice, but out of memory. This is the safety creation trap. The paradox where the very mechanisms you build to protect yourself end up creating the pain you were trying to avoid. You wall yourself in so no one can harm you, but then ache from the emptiness. You crave connection, but the moment someone gets close, your defenses rise like instinct. You long to be seen, but hide the very parts that would make you visible. You mistake caution for wisdom and loneliness for strength, and you're not wrong to want safety. You were taught to need it. Maybe once you trusted someone and they shattered that trust. Maybe you were vulnerable and were met with indifference. Maybe you showed your real feelings and were ridiculed, or worse, ignored. And your mind, always learning, always adapting, wrote down a rule: keep people out. It's safer that way. So you start to build. You stop telling the full truth. You smile when you want to cry. You keep conversations light. You stay busy. You withdraw the moment things get emotionally complex. And it works. For a while. No one gets close enough to hurt you. But they also don't get close enough to hold you. And then a quiet ache sets in. You feel invisible in your own life. You wonder why people don't see you, why relationships feel hollow, why there's always a sense of distance. You start to believe that maybe something is wrong with you, that you're just not built for deep connection. But what's really happening is this. You've created an environment where connection can't happen. And now you're blaming the emptiness on your identity instead of your architecture. So you try something bold. You open up. You share a secret. You let someone see behind the curtain. You begin to feel hope again. Maybe this time will be different. But then they don't respond the way you needed. Maybe they withdraw. Maybe they betray your trust. Maybe they just don't understand. And that pain, sharp, familiar, ancient, surges back like a wave. You recoil. You retreat. And your mind says, see, I told you. This is why we build walls. So you build again. Higher. Thicker. And the cycle repeats. The safety creation trap is not just emotional. It becomes neurological. Every time you reinforce the pattern, your brain gets better at predicting pain and avoiding risk. You begin to see threats where there are none. You start interpreting kindness as manipulation, closeness as danger, vulnerability as stupidity. And even if someone does try to love you, they're loving a version of you that's armored. They don't reach the core. So when the relationship fails, you say, they never really saw me. But how could they? The truth is heartbreaking. You are often the architect of your own isolation. And it's not your fault. But it is your responsibility. You cannot heal while staying hidden. You cannot connect while curating. You cannot build safety without risking some degree of openness. And yes, that openness will hurt sometimes. It will invite disappointment, misunderstanding, even betrayal. But it's also the only place where real joy, love, and meaning can exist. Think of a child who falls and scrapes their knee. They cry, but they get up. They don't stop running forever. But if a child falls and is told, you should never have run in the first place, they stop moving. Not because they're weak, but because they were taught that safety matters more than experience. Many of us are those children, frozen in emotional movement, terrified not of pain, but of repeating pain. And so, we build, and build, until we live in fortresses made of past hurt, peering out through slits at a world we no longer touch. The first step out of this trap is not to demolish your walls all at once. That's too much. It's to acknowledge them, to trace their outlines, to ask, what pain built this layer? And does this still serve me? Some walls protected you when you were small, voiceless, alone. But you're not that person anymore. And you deserve to live without armor all the time. Start small. Let someone see a true part of you, not the curated version, not the polished mask, but something honest. Watch how it feels, not how they react, how you feel just letting it exist. That's the rewiring. Safety is not the absence of pain, it's the presence of connection even through pain. The knowledge that you can survive being seen and still be whole, that you can be rejected and still be worthy, that you can love and still lose and still live. You are not meant to be invincible. You are meant to be real. So take a breath. Lower the drawbridge just an inch. Let in light. Let in air. Let in the terrifying, beautiful risk of being known. Because the peace you want isn't behind the walls you've built. It's in the space between you and another when the walls finally fall. The time optimization spiral. You wake up and check the clock. Before you even feel rested, your mind starts planning. How can I use today better? What's the most efficient route? Can I fit in more? Can I do it faster? And somewhere deep beneath that urgency is fear. Not of time running out, but of time being wasted. You don't just want to live. You want every second to be maximized, to be meaningful, to be used. And in that pursuit, you fall into the spiral, the time optimization spiral, a loop where life stops being something you experience and starts becoming something you calculate. Every task must have purpose. Every moment must be squeezed. Rest becomes rebranded as recovery, hobbies become side hustles, walks become podcast time, and silence becomes dead air that must be filled with growth. You're not living your life. You're managing it. And the worst part? You're praised for it. You're seen as driven, focused, high-functioning. You track your minutes, batch your tasks, stack your habits, and people admire the machine you've become, never realizing what it cost you to wear that armor. Because somewhere along the way, joy slipped out of frame. You don't listen to music. You process it while replying to emails. You don't watch the sunset. You photograph it for engagement. You don't talk to your friend. You schedule a catch-up call between meetings. Time stopped being a space and became a score. And no matter how fast you move, the scoreboard always resets. More steps, more books, more revenue, more output, more. But here's what no one tells you. When every second must be meaningful, nothing feels sacred anymore. When joy must be efficient, it begins to feel like work. And when time becomes a currency, you never feel rich. Let's make it real. Amrita used to paint for hours, losing track of time. Now she schedules 45-minute creative sprints into her planner. She tells herself it's discipline, but it feels hollow, because the magic didn't live in the painting. It lived in the freedom to forget the clock. Or think of Karan, who used to cook slowly, casually. Now he meal preps a week's worth of food in one evening, measuring nutrition, portioning grams. It's practical, it's smart, but he misses the smell of garlic when there's no stopwatch running beside it. What used to be pleasure is now performance, because in the spiral, stillness equals loss. But that's the illusion, the fear that if you're not optimizing, you're falling behind. But behind what? A version of you that never rests? A future that never arrives? A clock that never stops? This is the quiet trap of modern life. We confuse motion with meaning. We think more speed equals more life. But sometimes, speed is just escape in disguise. Escape from presence. Escape from uncertainty. Escape from the terrifying idea that maybe time isn't supposed to be used. Maybe it's supposed to be felt. And you can't feel time when you're constantly dissecting it. You can't fall in love, or grieve, or laugh until you cry, on a schedule. The best things in life dissolve structure. They demand surrender. And that surrender feels dangerous when you're trapped in the spiral, because the spiral trains you to fear softness, to fear idleness, to fear the invisible value of simply being alive. So, what's the way out? It's not about throwing away your goals or never checking a clock again. It's about unhooking worth from productivity. It's about learning to sit in a moment that serves no function and letting it be enough. To walk without tracking steps. To read without underlining quotes. To waste time, beautifully, consciously, rebelliously. Because wasted time isn't always wasted. Sometimes it's where your soul stretches, where memory is made, where presence returns. The spiral will whisper that you're falling behind. But behind what? There's no final scoreboard, no finished version of life. Only this hour, this breath, this you. So pause. Let the clock keep ticking. But don't race it. You were never meant to be a machine. You were meant to be a witness to joy, to stillness, to time, not optimized, but lived. The authenticity proof cycle. You want to be real, not impressive, not perfect, just real. You want to speak from the core, act without the mask, be seen without explanation. You want to stop performing, stop curating, stop editing your truth to fit someone else's script. But then, the world looks back, and suddenly, your realness becomes a performance. You say, "This is who I am," but only after practicing the line in your head 5 times. You post your raw thoughts, but only after trimming the mess, softening the edges, making sure it still looks like you. You show your flaws, but only the safe ones, the ones that look courageous when revealed. And without noticing, you fall into the authenticity proof cycle. The trap where your desire to be genuine slowly transforms into a need to prove that you're genuine. And the moment that need arises, authenticity dies. Because once you're trying to look real, you're no longer being real. You're acting, you're shaping, you're managing the perception of realness, which is just another mask. Thinner, yes, but still a mask. You think, if I can just show them I'm not fake, if I can just convince them I'm sincere, if I can just express my truth clearly enough, they'll believe me. But what you're really saying is, I don't trust my own realness unless others validate it. And that's the cycle. Realness becomes a role. Truth becomes a script. You become the director of your authenticity, framing it, rehearsing it, timing it just right to land. You want your vulnerability to look spontaneous, your flaws to feel earned, your uniqueness to shine without trying too hard. But that trying, that's where it unravels. Because authenticity doesn't perform. It doesn't ask for proof. It just is. And that just is terrifies you. Because being raw, without spin, without polish, without control, that's risky. That's vulnerable. That's standing in the open without a caption, without an apology, without a performance contract to protect you. So instead, you prove. You prove with your tone, with your unedited words, with your no makeup, no filter moments, with your carefully imperfect self. And in doing so, you drift from the very thing you wanted to embody. And you don't notice at first, because the world rewards this performance. People applaud your honesty. They say, "You're so authentic," and that compliment feels like truth. But it's not truth. It's recognition of a role you've played well. And now, you're trapped. Because if you ever stop appearing authentic, people pull away. They say, "You've changed. You're different now. You used to be real." And suddenly, you're no longer just trying to be yourself. You're trying to protect your brand of realness. Now, even your silence must be curated. Even your absence must be explained. Even your resistance must be framed as intentional vulnerability. So you tighten the mask again, this time with the word authentic stamped across it. And it feels worse than the first mask, because it lies better. But this isn't a dead end. There is a way out. Not by proving, not by explaining, but by losing the audience. By letting go of how you're perceived, by allowing people to misunderstand you, by allowing your realness to look wrong in someone else's eyes. That's the moment you stop performing. Not when your truth lands, but when you no longer need it to. When you no longer fear being mistaken. When you no longer ask, "Do they see the real me?" Because you do. You see it. You know it. And that's enough. Authenticity is not a spotlight. It's a mirror. And you stand in front of it alone, not waiting for applause, not waiting for permission, just witnessing what is, even when it's messy, even when it's unremarkable, even when it doesn't prove anything to anyone. That's the exit from the cycle. You stop chasing the appearance of real, and instead, you live the cost of being it, because realness costs. It costs you your image. It costs you your control. It costs you the polished version of yourself that others fell in love with. But what you get in return is peace. Not performance peace, but deep, terrifying, beautiful peace. The kind that doesn't need a camera. The kind that breathes in private. The kind that no one claps for, but you feel in your bones. That's the moment you're not just authentic. You're free. The understanding spiral gap. You try to explain. You choose your words carefully. You share what you feel. Not just the surface, but the layers underneath. You open up a part of yourself most people never see, and they nod. but you can feel it. They don't really get it. So you try again. You clarify, add context, offer metaphors. You dig deeper into the feeling, hoping this time the words will land, that this time they'll say, I see you, I understand, but they don't. And so you spiral. This is the understanding spiral gap. It's the ache of being sincere and still being misunderstood. The quiet panic that sets in when language fails, again. You begin to question your delivery, then your clarity, then your entire self. Maybe I'm not explaining it right. Maybe I'm being too vague, too much, not enough. Maybe I'm asking for something that doesn't exist. You keep going. Keep reshaping your feelings into sentences, each one more precise, more vulnerable. You empty yourself out, word by word, trying to translate the untranslatable. But the more you explain, the more distant the other person feels, like they're drifting away, and you're just shouting into a widening canyon. And somewhere along the way, something terrifying happens. You start to question whether you even understand what you're feeling. Because if you did, why is it so hard to explain? That's the spiral. You began by trying to be seen, but now you're not sure you're visible even to yourself. You chase understanding like oxygen, not because you're dramatic, but because connection matters. Because to be mirrored, even a little, feels like proof that you're not alone, that what you're going through is real, that your emotions have edges, shapes, not just chaos disguised as language. But the harder you try, the blurrier it gets. And that's when exhaustion sets in. Not physical, emotional. A bone-deep tiredness from carrying unspeakable weight in a language no one seems to understand. You feel absurd, too complicated, too emotional. You think, if I can't explain it, maybe I don't deserve to be understood. And in that thought lies a silent, dangerous surrender. But here's the truth. Some feelings are bigger than words. Some wounds don't translate cleanly. Some truths have no map. And that doesn't make them less real. That doesn't make you less valid. Your depth isn't a flaw. Your difficulty expressing it isn't failure. It's a measure of complexity. A sign that what lives inside you can't be simplified into a sentence and neatly placed in someone else's comprehension box. And just because they don't understand doesn't mean you're incomprehensible. It just means the bridge between you wasn't strong enough. Not yet. Because understanding isn't just about the speaker, it's about the listener, about their presence, their willingness, their capacity. And sometimes, the person you're explaining yourself to doesn't have the architecture to hold you. It's not that you're wrong, it's not that you're broken. It's that you're pouring ocean into a cup that can only hold rain. So what do? You stop chasing comprehension in places where it won't grow. You allow yourself to feel what you feel, even if no one gets it. You stop treating understanding as the only path to healing, and you begin building a new one through self-trust. You ask, do I believe myself? Do I honor what I feel, even when no one else reflects it back? Because sometimes, understanding doesn't come from outside. Sometimes, it's built inward, in quiet moments, in solitude, in the stillness after the spiral ends. You are not too much. You are not confusing. You are a language not everyone speaks. But that doesn't mean you stop speaking. It means you keep expressing, even if the world doesn't reply with perfect clarity. Because your truth is still yours, your feelings are still valid, and your voice still matters, even when it echoes back as silence. Sometimes, the spiral ends not with understanding, but with acceptance. And sometimes, that's the beginning of something even deeper. The sleep anxiety loop. You lay down. The room is quiet. The lights are off. You've done everything right. No caffeine, no screens, no distractions. You're tired. You want to sleep. But your mind? It's not ready to follow. A thought stirs. Then another. Then another. And suddenly your body is still, but your brain is sprinting. You check the clock, 11:42. Too late to waste time. You think, I really need to sleep now. But that thought doesn't help. It hurts. Because now you're not just awake, you're aware that you're awake. And that awareness becomes the trap. This is the sleep anxiety loop. It starts with something simple, a racing mind. You're overstimulated. Maybe it's stress. Maybe it's overstretched nerves from the day. But you're not worried yet. You tell yourself it'll pass. You try to calm down. But calming down becomes another task, another expectation. And here's where the loop tightens. The act of trying to sleep becomes the reason you can't. You roll over, try a new position, inhale, exhale, you count. You imagine oceans, forests, clouds, nothing works. You think, what if I don't sleep tonight? What if I'm ruined tomorrow? And now, you're not just lying in bed. You're auditioning for sleep. You're performing it, waiting for the curtain to fall. But the audience is only your own dread, and it's not applauding. The problem isn't just being awake. It's being awake with pressure, because sleep used to be natural, unconscious. But now, it feels like a skill you've forgotten. Something you once did effortlessly is now locked behind performance anxiety. Like trying to relax when someone's watching, like trying to yawn on cue. The more you need it, the further it retreats. And every failed attempt becomes evidence, proof that something's wrong, that you've lost it, that your mind is no longer safe to rest inside. You scroll, you get up, you try again. But now it's past midnight, and you've already slipped into stage 2 of the loop, forecast anxiety. You start imagining tomorrow's failures, being tired, unfocused, dull. You imagine the bags under your eyes, the mistakes at work, the irritability, the frustration. Sleep is no longer the goal, it's the threat avoidance strategy. And that shift is fatal, because now sleep is no longer peaceful, it's a deadline. And what do deadlines do? They kill creativity, they kill relaxation, they force the mind into corners. And that's what happens at 1:37 a.m. when you're staring at the ceiling, wondering if this is going to break you. You think about sleep more than you've ever thought about anything. And yet, it won't come. Because you've made it the center of attention. And sleep, like a shy animal, flees from the spotlight. But here's the deeper truth. This loop doesn't begin in bed. It begins in how you relate to control. Because for many people, sleep anxiety isn't about sleep. It's about surrender. And if you're someone who manages life through hypervigilance, control, or prediction, then sleep is terrifying. It's the one state where you have to let go. You can't micromanage unconsciousness. You can't force your brain to let go of itself. And that's where the fear creeps in. Because if you let go and don't fall asleep, it feels like a failure. It feels like losing. And so, your identity becomes fused with your sleep. If I don't sleep, I'll break. If I don't sleep, I'll be useless. If I don't sleep, I'm not okay. The bed becomes a battlefield, not for rest, but for proving your sanity. That's the trap. So, how do you break it? Not with better hacks, not with stricter routines, but with a different relationship to failure. You must allow sleep to not come and still be okay. That's the paradox. The loop breaks when you stop needing sleep to validate your stability. When you say, maybe I won't sleep tonight. Maybe I'll be tired, and I'll survive. You stop treating sleeplessness like a catastrophe. You start treating it like weather. Uncomfortable, yes, but temporary. Powerless to destroy you. Because the truth is, you have survived every sleepless night before. You've gotten through days in a fog. You've stumbled, struggled, functioned, and sleep always returns. Not through force, but through exhaustion, acceptance, timing. The less you chase it, the more it finds you. So, the next time you're in bed, mind racing, heart pounding, try this. Don't sleep. Rest. Tell yourself, I don't need to sleep. I just need to lie here and breathe. Stop performing, stop trying, let the moment be enough. Your brain may still buzz, let it. You don't need to win against your mind. You just need to stop fueling the war. Eventually the loop breaks not because you conquered it, but because you stopped believing it was a loop at all. You stepped off the stage. You let the curtain fall, and in the quiet, with nothing left to prove, sleep walks in on its own. The vulnerability regression loop. You open your heart, maybe just a little. A truth slips out, a fear, a hurt, a memory you rarely share. You hope it lands softly. You hope it's received. Instead, there's a pause, a hesitation. They don't say what you needed to hear. Maybe they change the subject. Maybe they laugh nervously. Maybe they go quiet, not out of cruelty, but confusion. Still, the message reaches you loud and sharp. This was too much. You feel it immediately, like a door slamming shut. Shame floods in. You begin to question everything. Did I say it wrong? Was I too intense? Am I just too much? This is the beginning of the vulnerability regression loop. The The cycle where opening up doesn't lead to closeness, but to distance. And not just distance from others, distance from yourself. So, what do? You close off. You become careful. You rehearse your words before speaking. You keep things light, neutral, safe. You smile when you want to scream. You say, "I'm fine," when you're not even close. You feel like you're protecting yourself, but really, you're retreating into invisibility. And then one day someone says it. "Why are you so distant?" They accuse you of being cold, unavailable, hard to read. The very silence that was supposed to protect you is now your crime. So, you try again, you open up. Just a little. You reveal a softer part. Maybe something about your past, your longing, your fear of being misunderstood. But once more, they retreat, or freeze, or respond in a way that makes you question why you bothered in the first place. And around you go. Vulnerability, withdrawal, blame, accusation, attempt, recoil, loop. At some point, you begin to believe something must be wrong with you, that your emotional openness is defective, that your needs are unreasonable, that the very parts of you that crave connection are the ones that drive people away. You don't just hide yourself, you start to resent yourself. You say things like, "Maybe I expect too much. I should just keep things to myself. I don't want to be a burden." But here's the truth you haven't been told. Vulnerability doesn't always breed intimacy. It can, but only under the right conditions. Vulnerability is not a magic key that opens every door. It's a delicate offering. It requires readiness on both sides. And if the other person isn't capable, or present, or emotionally literate, your honesty may not land where it's meant to. It may ricochet back as silence or discomfort. Not because you were wrong to speak, but because they were never ready to listen. Still, your nervous system doesn't know that. It doesn't distinguish between neglect and misattunement. All it knows is, I reached out, and I felt pain. So it learns. Don't reach out again. Now your brain is pattern matching. Every time you try to open up, it scans for rejection. Every flicker of disconnection is amplified. You walk into each conversation with half your soul clenched, expecting withdrawal. And often, you get it. Not because you're flawed, but because fear becomes self-fulfilling. But here's the heartbreak. You were never wrong for wanting to be known. What's broken isn't your openness. What's broken is the expectation that every listener will be capable of holding what you share. We live in a culture that encourages surface connection. Smile, share fun facts, keep things upbeat. But when you start speaking in the language of depth, of grief, of loneliness, of raw need, you'll often find yourself met with blank stares. Not because people don't care, but because they were never taught how to respond. So you internalize their retreat as your defect. But it's not. You are not too deep. You are not too emotional. You are not too intense. You're just speaking to people who have never heard their own soul clearly enough to understand yours. To break the loop, you must do something radical, something terrifying. You must stop making your vulnerability conditional on their reaction. You must speak your truth not because it will be received, but because it deserves to be spoken. You must stop handing your self-worth to people unequipped to hold it. Not everyone is your mirror. Some people are shadows, some people are walls, some are just not ready. That doesn't mean you're broken. It means you are brave enough to speak in a language most have forgotten. The loop ends not when others finally understand you, but when you stop seeing their inability to connect as proof that you're unworthy of connection. You can begin to choose differently. Share with those who've earned your trust. Be open, but not indiscriminate. Seek resonance, not just reaction. And when you are met with silence or withdrawal, feel the pain, but don't let it rewrite your story. You were meant to be seen. But not everyone can see. That's not your fault. That's just the truth. And the moment you stop shrinking in response to their blindness is the moment you begin to see yourself clearly again. The good deed recoil. You saw someone struggling, so you reached out. You gave your time, your effort, your heart. And instead of gratitude, you got rejection, suspicion, or worse, anger. They pulled away, snapped at you, accused you of control, of pity, of meddling. And now, something inside you recoils. This is the good deed recoil, the quiet moment after kindness backfires, when the warmth you offered is returned with coldness or silence, and your mind begins to spiral. Did I do too much? Did I cross a line? Did I make it about me? The self-doubt sinks in. You replay the gesture 100 different ways, and slowly you begin to build a new rule in your mind. Kindness can be dangerous. That's when the retreat begins. You hesitate before helping again. You analyze every instinct. You overthink simple gestures. A part of you, once generous, open, quick to give, becomes guarded. Because now kindness feels like a risk. And eventually, you help less. Not because you don't care, but because you're afraid to be hurt again. You pass by people in need. You say, "It's not my place." You scroll past cries for help. You say, "They probably don't want to hear from me." You become cautious, diplomatic. You say just enough to feel human, but not enough to feel vulnerable. And then, the guilt creeps in. You see someone else give freely, and you feel a sting. You remember when you used to do the same. You hear a story of someone being saved by a single gesture, and you wonder if your hesitation might have cost someone that same lifeline. So, eventually, you try again. You offer help. You reach out. And sometimes it works. But sometimes, it doesn't. And the cycle repeats. This is the strange, painful paradox of being human. We're wired to care. But caring carries weight, especially when it goes unreceived, or misunderstood, or twisted into something we never intended. Because not everyone is ready to receive kindness. Not everyone knows how to sit with vulnerability. Some people are drowning in shame, and when you throw them a rope, they don't grab it, they slap it away. Not because they hate you, but because accepting help makes them feel small, weak, exposed, and sometimes they need someone to lash out at. And the closest hand is yours. But here's what you must remember. Their reaction doesn't define your kindness. Your intention matters, even when the impact hurts. Your instinct to care is not wrong, just unprotected. And yes, boundaries matter, self-awareness matters, but so does grace for yourself. You're allowed to feel the sting of rejection. You're allowed to retreat. You're allowed to protect the tender part of you that got bruised. But don't let that part harden. Because once it does, you start living behind glass. Safe, but distant. Kind in theory, but absent in practice. And over time, you lose something precious, not just to others, but to yourself. That flicker of warmth, that spark of courage, that impulse to reach out even when there's no guarantee. Yes, kindness might backfire. Yes, your help might be misunderstood. Yes, someone might throw your love back in your face, but that doesn't make the love invalid. It makes it human. It makes it real. And sometimes, it makes it sacred. Let's make it real. Mira offered to drive her coworker home during a storm. They barely spoke before, but she saw the panic in his eyes. He snapped at her, said, "I'm not a charity case." She drove away in silence, heart pounding, wondering if she'd done something offensive. Weeks passed, she never offered again. But months later, he approached her quietly, said, "Thank you for that night. I just didn't know how to accept it." The seed she planted bloomed in secret, and she never would have known if she hadn't stayed open. So, here's the truth. Kindness is not a transaction. It's not about being appreciated. It's about being aligned with who you are. Some gifts land immediately. Some take root in silence. Some fall on stone and never bloom. But none are wasted, because the act shapes you. It preserves the softness. It reminds you that being a good person isn't about being seen. It's about being true. So, recoil if you need to. Lick the wound. Take your time. But don't stop reaching out. Don't stop helping. Don't stop being the one who cares, especially in a world that keeps giving us reasons not to. Because the moment you stop is the moment the world loses a light it didn't know it needed. And so do you. The worthiness benchmark spiral. You set the goal. You chase it. You sacrifice, grind, obsess, believing that once you reach it, you'll finally feel enough. And then, you do it. You arrive. You hit the mark. But the feeling fades, not slowly, not gently. It slips away like smoke in your hands, and almost immediately, a whisper returns. Now what? So you set another goal, a bigger one, a harder one that'll finally prove, this time, you're truly worthy. That's the worthiness benchmark spiral. The cycle where every achievement becomes just another rung on a ladder that never ends. You keep climbing, hoping that someday you'll reach a place that feels like enough. But the top never comes, because the worth was never in the goal. It was always in question. You say, when I get that job, I'll be proud. When I hit that number, I'll be safe. When they see me, I'll believe in myself. But you don't, because the belief is conditional, tied to external milestones, tied to performance, tied to the eyes of others, the scoreboard of success, the metrics you didn't even invent, but now live by. So even when you win, you still feel behind. Even when you achieve, the goalpost moves, and each time you chase again, faster, harder, more desperate. Not because you're greedy, but because you're scared. Scared that if you stop climbing, you'll fall. Scared that if you stop proving, you'll disappear. You call it ambition. But it's not just hunger. It's hunger wrapped around fear. Fear of being seen without a title. Fear of resting without guilt. Fear of existing without earning it. Because somewhere deep down, a belief took root. Your value must be earned, not inherited, not inherent. Earned. So you benchmark everything. Not just your success, but your self-worth. You tie your identity to what you produce. You tie your belonging to what you achieve, and you call it progress. But it's a spiral. A beautiful, high-functioning spiral. Because the world applauds you. They cheer your growth, your hustle, your drive. They say, you're doing amazing, and you are, on the outside. But inside, you're tired, because no amount of progress quiets the voice that says, not yet. You keep waiting for the achievement that will finally stick. The one that won't fade. The one that will last longer than a week, a day, an hour. But that moment never comes. Because it's not the goal that's broken, it's the story. The story that says you are only valuable when you are climbing. That's the lie at the heart of the spiral. It tricks you into constant motion. It rewards your exhaustion. It glorifies your never-ending effort as noble, as necessary, as strength. But it's not strength to be at war with stillness. It's not power to fear rest. It's not self-love to only love yourself when you're winning. So what now? Do you stop setting goals? No. You still grow. You still dream. But you untangle your worth from your progress. You stop tying your value to outcomes. You let success be celebration, not validation. You let ambition rise from joy, not fear. Because the moment your self-worth depends on the next achievement, you never arrive. You run past every win, eyes already on the next mountain. You never get to feel proud, only relieved. And relief fades fast. But pride? Real pride comes when you say, I am enough, even when I'm still becoming. That's the pause that breaks the spiral. The moment you stand still, breathe, and let the silence tell you, you matter. Not because of what you did, not because of who approved, not because of what you'll do next, but simply because you are here. That's not weakness, that's the root. Because only from that place, where your worth is no longer a moving target, can you grow with peace. Not to prove you belong, but because you already do. The emotional pendulum trap. You feel it rising, that sharp edge behind your chest, that burn behind your ribs, anger, unwanted, uninvited. You tell yourself to calm down, to be rational, to breathe, because showing it would mean failure, would mean danger, would mean you're not in control. So you push it down. You swallow the words, flatten the tone, force a smile. You say you're fine, and for a while you even believe it. But emotions don't disappear. They wait. They wait in the body, in the jaw, in the chest, in the silence. And then when the pressure gets too high, when your mind can't keep the lid on any longer, it bursts, and the anger pours out. Sharp, loud, unfiltered. You yell, or shut down, or cry in ways you didn't expect. You say things you didn't mean, or maybe you meant them. You just never thought you'd say them out loud. Then, shame follows. You feel weak, embarrassed, like you failed some invisible test of maturity, so you turn the anger inward. You punish yourself, mentally, quietly. You promise to do better next time, to keep it in, to be calm, to control it. And so you suppress harder. But harder suppression means stronger explosions, and stronger explosions mean deeper self-punishment. And that loop becomes the trap. This is the emotional pendulum trap. A life swinging between silence and rupture, calm and chaos, denial, and eruption. And each time you swing, you lose a little more trust in yourself. You tell yourself you're unpredictable, dangerous, too emotional, not built for stability. But the truth is, you're not broken. You're just caught in a rhythm that was never yours to begin with. Maybe you grew up in a place where anger was dangerous, where showing it meant punishment, rejection, or fear. Maybe you learned that being calm meant being loved, that being quiet meant being safe, that to feel big emotions was to risk losing everything. So you taught yourself to shrink, to hide the heat, to bury the fire, to survive. But here's what no one told you. Repressed anger doesn't make you peaceful. It makes you a container under pressure. And containers always burst. Not because they're bad, but because they were never meant to hold that much pain for that long. You think anger is the problem. But anger was only ever a signal, a flare shot into the sky that something hurt, that something crossed a line, that something mattered to you. Suppressing the signal doesn't solve the problem, it just delays the explosion. And the worst part? The explosion feels like you. It feels like your identity, like proof that you're unstable. So you punish yourself, not realizing it was never about who you are. It was about what you were taught to hide. But there's a way out. You don't escape the pendulum by picking one side. You escape it by stepping off the swing entirely. That means learning to feel anger before it becomes a storm, to name it when it's still small, to speak it, not explode it, to admit it, not suppress it. It means letting yourself say, "I'm hurt," before you scream. "I feel dismissed," before you shut down. "I need space," before you run. Anger doesn't need to be violent. It needs to be heard. And the first person who needs to hear it is you. Not to judge it, not to tame it, but to understand it. Because when anger is witnessed without shame, it softens. When it's accepted without punishment, it transforms. Not into silence, but into clarity, into boundaries, into truth. The pendulum only swings when you deny what's real. But when you let the emotion speak, softly, slowly, honestly, the swing begins to still. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are just someone who was taught to fear their own fire. But fire doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it illuminates. The regret rewind cycle, ChatGPT said, it begins with a flicker, a single memory rising in the stillness, uninvited, unwanted, something you said or didn't say, something you did that left damage, something you should have known but didn't. At first, you observe it, then you relive it, and suddenly, you're no longer here. You're back there, again. The same moment, the same mistake, the same version of you wish you could erase. You don't mean to do it, but you do, again and again and again. This is the regret rewind cycle. It feels harmless at first, just a mental rewatch, a private audit of the past. But it doesn't stop there. You start tweaking the scene, rewriting the lines, replacing your reaction. You imagine what you should have said, what you should have done. In this version, you stand taller, you pause before you lash out. You see the warning signs in time. You walk away before the damage is done. And for a second, it brings comfort, because this mental editing room gives you back what the real moment stole: control, power, grace. But the relief fades fast, because no matter how many times you reimagine the past, it remains untouched. You step out of the fantasy and return to the same unchangeable truth. It happened. You can't fix it. You can't undo it. And yet, your mind sends you back, again and again, as if this time the rewrite will leak into reality, as if thinking harder will change history. This is the trap. The loop doesn't offer resolution, it offers familiarity. The memory becomes a well-worn path. Painful, yes, but predictable. You don't visit it for punishment. You visit it for something to hold. In a world full of unknowns, regret becomes a kind of anchor, a horrible comfort. A wound that gives you identity. I am the one who failed. I am the one who ruined it. I am the one who didn't act in time. Regret reshapes your narrative, not just what happened, but who you think you are because of it. You start carrying that moment like a verdict, a frozen snapshot of your worst self. And with enough loops, the brain begins to believe, this is me. I am this mistake. I am that moment replayed forever. The loop hardens. The memory becomes more vivid than your actual present, and the past becomes not a place you remember, but a place you live. Why does it grip so tightly? Because regret has a strange rhythm. It pretends to be productive. It disguises itself as reflection. It says, if I replay this enough, I'll never repeat it. It promises growth. But underneath that is shame. The kind of shame that doesn't teach, it paralyzes. And instead of building wisdom, it builds self-doubt. You stop trusting yourself. Every new decision feels haunted. Every joy feels undeserved. Because in the corner of your mind is always that one moment, the one you got wrong. And worse, your mind believes it can fix the feeling if you just think about it more. But it can't. Because regret is not a puzzle. It's a wound. And you don't heal wounds by picking at them. You heal them by leaving them alone long enough to scar. So, how do you exit the loop? Not by erasing the memory, not by pretending it didn't happen, but by facing it with a different question. Not, how could I be so stupid? But what was I trying to protect? Not, why didn't I act differently? But what did I not know then that I know now? You shift from blame to compassion, from interrogation to understanding. You remind yourself, that version of you, the one who failed, who froze, who said too much or too little, they weren't evil. They were human. They acted with the tools they had, with the awareness they had, with the pain they carried, and now you are different. Not because you regret, but because you see. The loop breaks not when you forgive the past, but when you stop expecting it to give you peace. You stop asking the memory to change. You stop begging it to comfort you. You let it be what it was, a moment. Not a prophecy, not a sentence, just one moment in the long, uneven novel of you. There will still be echoes, triggers, random returns. That's okay. But when they come, you don't climb back in. You nod at them. You say, yes, I remember. And then you keep walking. Because life only moves in one direction. And the truth is, you're not the person who made that mistake anymore. You're the person who carries the memory and keeps going anyway. And that's how the loop finally ends. The self-fixing loop. You wake up with the impulse to be better, to fix something, your posture, your productivity, your tone of voice, your skin, your schedule, your habits, your relationships, your diet, your mindset. You're not broken exactly, but you're not finished either. There's always something to refine. You find pride in this, progress, growth, discipline. You scroll past motivational quotes and think, yes, I should improve that too. You buy the book, you take the course, you upgrade the app. This is the self-fixing loop. A cycle that begins with awareness, is fueled by inadequacy, and is disguised as virtue. It feels like you're moving forward, but you're actually circling the same internal wound over and over, sanding away the surface of your identity in search of some final, polished version of you that never arrives. Because every fix seems to uncover another flaw. You start by fixing your time management. Great. But now you realize how often you people please. So you set boundaries. But now you feel guilty about the tension in your relationships. So you work on emotional resilience. But that reveals your childhood fear of abandonment. So now you're deep in shadow work, inner child healing, nervous system regulation, ego detachment, and suddenly, self-help has become self-haunting. You no longer live, you renovate, and it never stops. There's always a new theory, a new framework, a new label to explain why you feel the way you do. You collect diagnoses like trophies, hoping that naming the broken pieces will help you glue them back together. You journal, reflect, analyze, reparent. You measure your healing by how little you cry, how steady your breathing is, how fast you can reframe pain into a lesson. And maybe you do improve. You become more articulate, more regulated, more insightful. But at some point, you begin to notice. Joy has become clinical. Spontaneity feels unsafe. Rest feels unearned. You're not living, you're scanning. Watching yourself from above, monitoring your emotional output like a lab rat tracking cortisol spikes. You can't just be angry anymore. You have to analyze the origin of the anger, track it to an unmet childhood need, and rewrite the neural pathway. This loop is seductive because it wears the mask of maturity. Society rewards people who are working on themselves. You're seen as wise, conscious, aware, but the loop becomes toxic when working on yourself becomes your identity, when fixing becomes your safety, when stillness becomes a threat because it means sitting in a version of yourself that you've been taught is unacceptable. At its core, this loop is powered by a belief so quiet it rarely gets questioned. I am not enough yet. So everything becomes a project. Your body, your trauma, your love life, even your spirituality. And when nothing feels complete, you assume that's proof that you still have more to fix. But what if that feeling isn't signaling a flaw? What if it's signaling fatigue? What if you're not meant to be a constant construction site? What if the self doesn't need to be redesigned endlessly, but remembered? Because somewhere in this loop, you forgot how to trust stillness. You forgot how to celebrate traits you weren't trying to optimize. You forgot how to sit with sadness without immediately trying to alchemize it into insight. You forgot how to be human. And the hardest part? You might be afraid to stop fixing. Because who are you without the effort? You've built your sense of worth on progress, on self-awareness, on healing. But healing isn't a personality. It's a process that's meant to lead you back to living. The truth is, you will always be a little incomplete, always a little unhealed, always in motion. Because you're not a machine with settings to perfect. You're a living being with complexity that can't be fully solved. There's a difference between growth and compulsive correction. Growth is expansive. It creates room for joy, for contradiction, for rest. Compulsive correction shrinks you. It puts your soul under a microscope and calls every blemish a failure. So, how do you break the loop? You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What if nothing is wrong with me right now?" You stop hunting for flaws to fix and start nurturing traits you've ignored. Playfulness, awe, laziness, laughter, imperfection. You stop seeing the self as a problem to be solved and start treating it like a garden, sometimes messy, sometimes overgrown, sometimes flowering for no reason other than the sun happened to shine. You don't need to give up self-awareness, but you can give up self-war. Because at some point, healing has to mean coming home to yourself, not building a better version of you to finally deserve love. And maybe the most powerful form of growth isn't fixing another flaw. It's declaring, "Today I am not a project, I am a person, and that is enough." The thought observer trap. You think. And then something shifts. You notice that you're thinking. You watch the thought rise, float, fade. And for a moment, you feel awake, aware of your own mind, separate from it. But then another layer appears. You begin thinking about that moment of awareness, and suddenly, you're not just the thinker, you're the one watching the thinker. And now you're spiraling. This is the thought observer trap. A strange loop where every time you try to catch your mind, it splits into more versions of itself. A thought observing a thought. A self watching a self. And each layer asking, "Is this the real me?" You go inward looking for the source, and all you find is reflection after reflection, as if your consciousness were a mirror pointed at another mirror, stretching into infinity. At first, it feels like clarity, like enlightenment, but then it becomes disorienting, because if you're not your thoughts, and you're not the observer, then who are you? You might think this is philosophy, but it happens every day. You're walking, and a random memory hits you. Then a voice inside comments, "Why did I think of that?" And another voice replies, "Why do I always overanalyze things?" And then, "Am I broken for always doing this?" You're no longer thinking. You're watching yourself. Think about thinking. And the more you look, the blurrier it gets. You can't find the thinker. Because every time you try, the one doing the searching becomes the next layer to observe. The closer you get to the center, the more it moves. Like chasing your own shadow around a circle. And you wonder, was I ever just a single self? Or am I just layers pretending to be one thing? Let's make it real. A guy named Arjun tries meditation for the first time. The instructor says, "Just observe your thoughts without judgment." So he does. A thought arises. "I forgot to reply to that email." Then another. "I'm always forgetting things." Then, "Why can't I stay present?" He tries to let go. But now, he's observing how bad he is at observing. And in trying to quiet the mind, he's multiplied its voices. He didn't escape thought. He amplified it. Or take Nia, who begins journaling for self-discovery. She writes, "I feel anxious because I fear rejection." Then she writes, "Or maybe I fear being invisible." Then, "Or maybe I'm just writing what sounds deep because I want to impress myself." Her attempt at honesty becomes performance. Her performance becomes self-analysis. and the mirror keeps folding in on itself. This trap isn't rare. It's not some edge case of consciousness. It's built into the structure of human awareness. The mind can turn in on itself infinitely. And it will, unless you notice how it turns. Because here's the paradox. The mind can observe itself, but it can't catch itself. Not fully. You can shine a flashlight into the dark, but you can't shine it on the hand that holds it. That's why trying to find the true self through thought leads to spirals. Because the self you're looking for is the one doing the looking. So, what do? Do you stop thinking? You can't. Do you ignore the observer? You can't do that either, but you can step out of the trap. By realizing that not every thought needs to be tagged, not every layer needs to be peeled. Some things, like presence, like being, don't arrive through pursuit. They arrive when you stop chasing, when you feel your breath, not analyze it, when you hear a song, not label your reaction. When you laugh, not because it means something, but because it feels true. You are not a puzzle to be solved. You are not a mirror to be endlessly reflected. You are the light in which thoughts appear. You are the space in which awareness plays. And you don't need to know who the real thinker is to be real. You already are. So the next time your mind splits and splits again, trying to catch itself in the act, pause. Don't fix it. Don't name it. Just notice the noticing. And let it pass. Because sometimes the deepest form of clarity is knowing that not everything needs to be understood. Some things just need to be felt and then released. The story rewrite spiral. You narrate your life like a story. You thread moments into meaning. You give reasons to your actions, arcs to your pain, titles to your chapters. You say, this happened and then I became who I am. It feels clean. It feels real. But then, a crack. You revisit that story and feel something wrong, a detail out of place, a motive that doesn't hold, a memory that doesn't match. So you rewrite it. You say, no, I didn't leave because I was brave. I left because I was scared. You say, I didn't fall in love because it was fate. I fell because I was lonely. You edit, you revise, you reframe, and for a moment, the story feels stronger, truer, until doubt creeps back in. You remember another version, a conflicting detail, a feeling you hadn't accounted for, and suddenly, even your rewrite feels like fiction. So you do it again and again. That's the story rewrite spiral, the haunting cycle where every attempt to make sense of your life collapses under the weight of too many versions, where your past becomes a mirror house, each reflection slightly warped, each explanation echoing into contradiction, until truth and fiction blur. You're not lying. You're searching for the version that finally feels complete, that finally explains everything, that finally settles the noise. But it never comes, because memory isn't fact, it's reconstruction. Each time you revisit a moment, you rebuild it through your current self, through your current emotions, through your current regrets, and those change constantly. So your story keeps shifting, not because you're dishonest, but because you're human. And humans don't store experiences, they store interpretations. And interpretations bend. They bend with mood, with hindsight, with healing, with pain. So, the story you told at 20 isn't the story you tell at 30, and the story you'll tell at 50 will contradict them both. And the more self-aware you become, the more dangerous it gets. Because now, you're watching yourself narrate, doubting every conclusion, peeling back every explanation. Questioning not just what you did, but why you said you did it. You dig and dig, hoping to find the real narrative, the core, the truth beneath all the edits. But there is no final draft. There is no clean version. Because every explanation is shaped by the moment it was told. And so, you spiral. You start to distrust yourself. Not just your past, but your ability to know your past. Not just your feelings, but your capacity to name them without distorting them. You ask, was I kind, or was I just afraid of conflict? Was I honest, or did I just tell a prettier version of my fear? Did I love them, or did I need them? And the longer you sit with these questions, the more it all unravels. The narrative doesn't bring clarity anymore. It brings noise. Because now, even silence has commentary. Even your attempts to stop narrating become new layers of narration. You say, I'll stop explaining, I'll just let it be. But then you explain why you're letting it be. And the spiral tightens. So what do? Give up the story? No. You keep telling it. But differently. You stop trying to pin it down. You stop pretending that memory is law. You stop demanding a single, pure, perfect explanation. And instead, you let your story breathe. You say, this is how it felt then, and this is how it feels now. And both can be true, even if they don't match. You hold contradictions without needing to resolve them. You allow your past to shift in the light. You stop chasing the final version of yourself, because there isn't one. You're not a book. You're a living draft, being edited by time, by insight, by pain, by joy, by the quiet moments that change everything without making a sound. So, when the spiral calls you back, when you feel the urge to rewrite again, pause, not to silence it, but to witness it, and say, the story wants new meaning again. And that's okay, because you don't need the truth to be fixed. You just need it to be felt, in this moment, not as proof, but as presence. That's the way out. Not by escaping the spiral, but by walking through it without needing to make it make sense. Because maybe the real story is that you kept showing up, even as the pages kept changing. The meaning deferral loop. You tell yourself you're looking for meaning. You want purpose, direction, a reason to keep waking up that feels deeper than routine. So you search through work, through love, through ideas, through pain, and then you find something, a cause, a passion, a connection, a belief. And for a moment, it feels like enough. You feel the warmth of clarity, the quiet click of, this is it. And for a few hours, or days, maybe even months, it fills the gap. But then it starts. The whisper. Is this really it? Is this deep enough? What if this is just another distraction dressed as meaning? And before long, you start pulling it apart. You analyze it, test it, poke holes in it. You dismantle the very thing that gave your life structure, because if it can be dismantled, how could it ever have been real? This is the meaning deferral loop, the endless cycle of finding purpose, and then interrogating it until it collapses. Not because it wasn't valuable, but because you can't sit still with the feeling of enough. You've trained yourself to doubt satisfaction, to treat peace as a trap, to mistrust anything that ends the search. And so, you become addicted to becoming, addicted to the chase, addicted to the horizon that always moves as you approach it. You want something solid, but solidity makes you suspicious, because deep down, you fear what happens when the searching stops. Who are you without the ache? Without the question? Without the momentum of always reaching for more? So, every time something begins to feel meaningful, you step back and ask, but what if it's not? What if I'm fooling myself? What if I'm settling? And so, you dismantle. And then you start again. You tell yourself it's intellectual honesty, that you're avoiding delusion, that you're being careful, precise, wise, but really you're afraid of building your house on a foundation that might crack, afraid of waking up one day to realize you believed in something that couldn't hold you. So, you never let anything hold you. You keep your feet moving, your mind questioning, your hands busy. You chase answers, but never hold them. You grip just long enough to test them, and then let them go. You're not lost. You're stuck. Not in absence of meaning, but in the fear of fully accepting one. Because to accept a meaning means surrendering the freedom to keep searching. It means committing to something that might later feel wrong. It means choosing, and then living with that choice. And that terrifies you more than the void. So you make the void your home. You live in perpetual exploration. You build elaborate maps of ideas, frameworks, beliefs, but you never settle in any of them. And the ones who love you? They see the brilliance, but they also see the restlessness, the haunted look in your eyes when joy arrives too easily. Because joy feels like a lie. You've equated depth with difficulty, meaning with struggle. So when something comes freely, it feels suspect. And when something gives you peace, you assume it must be shallow. But here's the truth you don't want to admit. Nothing will feel like enough if you keep tearing it down to check its roots, because meaning isn't a perfect object to be tested. It's a relationship to be trusted. It's not about whether it can withstand every question. It's about whether it lights something real inside you. And if it does, that is the proof. The loop ends not when you find the final answer, but when you stop demanding perfection from what gives you hope. You will always have doubts. You will always wonder what else could have been. But you can still choose to stay, to build something beautiful with your questions in your pocket, not wielded like weapons, but carried like tools, because the meaning that lasts is never the one that wins every argument. It's the one you return to, even after you've doubted it, even after the spiral, even after the silence. And one day, you'll look around and realize you stopped searching. Not because you gave up, but because you finally gave in to the truth that meaning isn't found. It's allowed. The comparison vortex, echo, it starts quietly. A scroll, a glance, a casual observation. Someone else's life, shinier, fuller, seemingly effortless, glows in your periphery. Their achievements, their relationships, their ease, and something inside you tightens. You don't mean to compare, but you do, instinctively, involuntarily, like blinking. And before you can stop it, you've fallen into it. The comparison vortex echo. It's not just envy, it's not just insecurity, it's a cycle, mechanical, emotional, recursive. You see someone doing more, having more, being more, and suddenly your own life shrinks. Your successes fade to grayscale. Your progress feels late. The house you live in, the body you wear, the words you write, the people who love you, all of it seems less, smaller, dimmer, inadequate, and with that feeling of lack, the spiral begins. At first, it's quiet self-judgment. Why am I not there yet? What's wrong with me? How do they make it look so easy? But then comes the second layer. You search for relief. You find someone doing worse, someone behind you, struggling. You compare again, but this time to feel better, to reassure yourself, to climb out of the spiral with perspective. And for a moment, it works. You feel reassured, grounded, slightly superior, human again. But then it hits. Guilt. Because now you're not just comparing, you're needing comparison to feel whole, and that awareness feels ugly, like a moral failing. You say, why do I need someone else to fail for me to feel okay? Why do I feel better seeing someone else suffer? You weren't raised to be like this. You want to be evolved, grateful, compassionate. But now, you're ashamed of your relief. You spiral again, this time deeper. The echo starts bouncing. You compare. You feel small. Then you compare downward. Feel guilty. Then compare again to the guilt-free version of yourself that you should be. A self that doesn't need external mirrors. That self is calm, unbothered, grounded in intrinsic worth. And you look at them, this fantasy of your ideal self, and now you feel even further behind. That's the cruelty of the vortex. It doesn't just trap you in others' lives. It traps you in imaginary versions of your own. Past selves that seemed purer. Future selves that seem impossible. You live in constant friction between who you are and who you think you should be, both distorted by borrowed metrics. And here's the tragedy. None of it is real. You don't know the people you're comparing yourself to. You see their highlights, their timing, their surface. You don't see the sacrifices, the private struggles, the emptiness behind the performance. And even when you do, your brain doesn't feel it, because comparison isn't logical. It's emotional. It bypasses empathy. It bypasses truth. It whispers, you're behind, even when there is no race. And yet, you still compare, not because you're vain, not because you're cruel, but because you're human. Because comparison is ancient, evolutionary. It was once about survival. Who's stronger? Who's faster? Who's more accepted by the tribe? We are wired to scan our environment and rank ourselves. It helped us belong. It helped us live. But now, it makes us sick. It fills our waking hours with whispers that aren't ours. It turns other people's lives into weapons aimed at our self-worth. It's a rigged game, because no matter how far you climb, the target moves. Someone will always have more, be more, seem more. And the worst part, we know it's an illusion. We know we're hurting ourselves. And we still can't stop. That's the echo, the inner voice that says, I should know better, I should feel better, I should be better than this. And so, you loop, ashamed not just of where you are, but of the fact that you're ashamed. So, how do you stop it? You don't, at least not all at once, but you can slow it. You can intervene. Not with perfection, but with pause. The next time you feel the vortex tug, try this. Name it. Say out loud, I'm comparing. Not judging, not shaming, just noticing. And then ask, what is this comparison trying to tell me? Is it showing you a value you've neglected? Is it pointing to a need, love, rest, acknowledgement, that you've been starving for? Use the comparison not as a mirror, but as a signal. Then do something radical. Wish the other person well. Not performatively, not as self-punishment, but as release. Let their success exist without it being a threat to yours, and remind yourself, someone else's abundance is not your absence. And finally, find your footing again. Return to your own path, your own metrics, your own story, because you weren't born to be a measurement. You were born to be a person. You don't have to be ahead. You just have to be here. The decision paralysis loop. You have a decision to make. Maybe it's big, whether to leave, to start, to say yes. Or maybe it's small. What to commit to today, what to put down, what to prioritize. Either way, it begins with awareness. There are multiple paths, and one of them might be right. But then comes the second thought. What if it's not? What if you choose wrong? This is the beginning of the decision paralysis loop. The mental trap where every option carries risk, so you think and rethink, until thinking becomes a substitute for acting. You call it being thorough, being responsible, but beneath it is fear. Fear of regret. Fear of loss, fear of missing the path that would have led to certainty. So you analyze. And in the process, you become disconnected, not just from the world, but from yourself. You play out every scenario. What happens if you choose A? Who gets hurt? Who judges you? What does it cost long term? What if you never recover from the mistake? What if B is safer, but less meaningful? What if C leads to freedom, but also loneliness? And as your brain stretches across timelines, possibilities pile up, overlapping, clashing, blurring. Now you're not weighing choices, you're drowning in them. The irony? The longer you analyze, the more unclear the answer becomes. The clarity you were chasing becomes fog. Your need for control creates chaos. And now the pressure increases, not just to choose, but to not fail. So you delay. You say, I need more time. You make a list. You ask others for their opinion. You research. You compare. You wait for a signal, but no signal comes. Instead, time moves. Life doesn't pause with your indecision. Doors begin to close. Opportunities shift. People move on. The options that once surrounded you start to thin. And now you're faced with a new kind of pain. Not the pain of choosing wrong, but the pain of not choosing at all. The choice made itself through your silence, and now the loop tightens. Because instead of moving on, you begin to analyze that. You ask, why didn't I act? Why did I freeze? What's wrong with me? What if that was my only shot? You replay the moment when you could have said yes. You revisit the window where action was possible, and now your intelligence, the very thing that made you cautious, becomes a blade you turn inward. You dissect your indecision. You examine your hesitation. You become a student of your own inaction. And beneath it all, shame builds. Because it's not just that the choice is gone, it's that you feel you let it go. And that shame feeds the next decision. Now, you're not just trying to choose wisely, you're trying to redeem yourself, to prove you can act. But the stakes feel even higher now, so you hesitate again. And the loop repeats. This is not laziness. This is not weakness. This is the shadow side of sensitivity, intelligence, and a deep desire to live a meaningful life. The more you care, the more you fear wasting your care. The more conscious you are, the more you sense what's at stake. The more options you perceive, the more roads lead to ruin. And so, ironically, your awareness becomes your cage. But here's what you were never taught. Certainty is not the reward for perfect analysis. It's the consequence of commitment. The moment you move forward, reality sharpens. The fog lifts. Not because you decoded the perfect path, but because motion itself generates clarity. You don't get insight and then act. You act, and then insight arrives. You don't end the loop by being smarter. You end it by being willing to move without guarantees. There will always be risk. There will always be loss. Even the right choice will cost you something. But the deeper question isn't which path is perfect. It's which path am I willing to meet fully, even if it hurts? Because in the end, what paralyzes you isn't risk. It's the illusion that you can avoid risk entirely. if you just wait long enough. But time doesn't make choices safer. It just makes them quieter, until all that's left is the echo of what could have been. So let yourself choose, not recklessly, not blindly, but bravely. Let yourself be wrong. Let yourself learn. Let yourself begin. Because while analysis protects you from mistakes, only movement protects you from regret. And regret doesn't come from failure. It comes from the haunting knowledge that you stood at the crossroads and never took a single step. The nostalgia feedback trap. You miss something, a time, a place, a version of you. It creeps in like a soft light, nostalgia. You close your eyes and it floods back. The way the air smelled, the song that played, the way you laughed without watching yourself laugh. And for a moment, it's comforting, like wrapping your soul in a familiar blanket. But then, the doubt arrives. Was it really that good? Weren't you also anxious back then? Didn't you cry behind closed doors? Suddenly your memory feels dishonest, your nostalgia feels naive, and now, instead of warmth, you feel guilt. For missing something that wasn't perfect. For idealizing something you know, logically, was flawed. And then another layer forms. You miss the moment when nostalgia didn't feel so heavy, when you could miss the past freely, without guilt, without critique. And now, you're spiraling. This is the nostalgia feedback trap, a strange loop where longing for the past turns into questioning the longing itself, where memory becomes a battleground between affection and accuracy, and where you begin to mourn not just the past, but your ability to feel it the way you used to. At first, nostalgia is pure. It isn't about truth, it's about meaning. You miss how that summer felt, not because it was perfect, but because it held something. Freedom, wonder, closeness. But your present self wants precision. It demands evidence. It says, don't you remember how lonely you were? Don't you recall the fights, the fear, the confusion? And so, you invalidate your own emotion. You cut your longing short. You tell yourself to grow up, to stop romanticizing, to stop missing a lie. But here's the thing. Nostalgia isn't lying to you. It's just highlighting what mattered, even if it was small or rare or surrounded by pain. It's not a documentary. It's a feeling, a reverberation of who you were, who you loved, and what once made you feel alive. But once you try to analyze it, you fracture it. You start comparing emotional memory to factual accuracy. And you forget that the heart and the mind record life in different ways. Let's make it real. Ria remembers her childhood neighborhood with warmth. The bikes, the laughter, the long shadows at dusk. Then she remembers the fighting inside her house, the fear, the hiding, and she feels guilty. How can I miss that place when I know what happened there? So she tries to forget. But the forgetting hurts too, because she isn't just missing a place. She's missing the version of herself that could still believe in magic despite the pain. And now, she misses her own innocence. That's the trap. You mourn the past, then mourn your mourning. And what began as love becomes confusion. So what's the way out? It's not to erase the flaws, and it's not to dismiss the warmth. It's to hold both. To say, yes, it was imperfect, and yes, I still miss it. You're allowed to long for a version of your life that wasn't complete, because you weren't complete. But that doesn't make the beauty less real, the joy less sacred, the comfort less true. It just makes it human. Like all things that matter, you don't have to defend your nostalgia. You don't have to correct it. You don't have to guilt trip yourself for feeling tenderness toward a past that hurt you. Because memory doesn't have to be fair. It just has to be honest to the heart. Sometimes we remember the golden moments because they helped us survive the dark ones. Sometimes we cling to the echo because the silence after was too loud. Sometimes we miss what never fully was because it pointed to what could have been. And sometimes we just miss who we were when we still believe things could stay the same. And that's okay. You can feel all of that without apology, without editing, without guilt. So the next time nostalgia knocks, don't slam the door. Let it in. Let it speak. Let it sit with you, even if it's bittersweet. And remember, you're not broken for longing. You're human for remembering. The reality verification spiral. You remember something, a moment, a glance, a sentence spoken in a room you know you were in. It felt real. It felt certain. But then, something shakes. Someone says, That's not how it happened. Or a photo tells a different story. Or time starts to corrode the edges. And suddenly you don't know if you can trust your memory anymore. So you seek proof. You dig for texts, for footage, for journals. You ask others, do you remember this? You replay the moment in your head like surveillance footage. You try to verify what you believe happened. But the proof feels thin. Because memory is soft. Because evidence can lie. Because even certainty can be forged. And that's how the spiral begins. The reality verification spiral. The loop where your effort to confirm reality only deepens your doubt. You find a message, but maybe it's out of context. You hear a recording, but maybe it doesn't mean what you think. You remember their tone, but maybe it was colored by emotion. And just like that, the ground cracks. You start to question everything. Not just the past, but your senses, your instincts, your grasp on truth itself. You think, if I can't trust this one memory, what else have I misremembered? And that question spreads like ink in water. Suddenly yesterday feels uncertain. Then last week. Then your entire childhood. And now you don't know what's real, or what was constructed, edited, reinterpreted by your mind to protect or punish you. And still, you search. You go back through old conversations. You scroll, you read, you analyze tone, punctuation, timestamps. You play detective in your own life, looking for clues that say you were right, that what you felt was real, that what happened actually happened. But you never find the resolution you crave, because for every piece of evidence, a new doubt appears, and doubt is clever. It doesn't scream, it whispers. What if you misunderstood? What if you wanted it to be true? What if you're just remembering what you needed to believe? And now, you're lost in layers. Reality becomes a hall of mirrors. You remember questioning your memory, so now even that memory is suspect. You replay the replay of the replay, and nothing feels solid anymore. Not your past, not your perception, not even your own intentions. Because if your mind can rewrite scenes without your consent, what else can it twist? And this isn't just paranoia, it's a deep existential fracture. Because reality is not just about what happens. It's about your ability to trust that it happened, to trust your eyes, your gut, your sense of time. And once that trust breaks, even truth feels like fiction. So you panic, not loudly, quietly. You start to ask others to verify things for you. Do you remember what I said? Was I wrong? Did that really happen? You rely on witnesses to anchor your world, but even they disagree. Even they forget. Even they carry their own distortions. So now, you don't just doubt yourself. You doubt the entire system. And the spiral tightens, because the more you doubt, the more you seek proof. And the more you seek proof, the more you find inconsistencies. And the more inconsistencies you find, the more reality dissolves. Until you're not looking for the truth anymore. You're looking for something, anything that will stop the spinning. You say, if I could just know one thing for sure, but you can't. Because reality isn't stored in hard drives. It's stored in minds. And minds forget. Minds protect. Minds hallucinate and highlight and hide. Even yours. Especially yours. So, what's the way out? It's not more proof. It's not another search. It's surrender. Not to fantasy. Not to helplessness. But to soft reality. The kind that says, I might never know for certain. And that's okay. The kind that lets memory be a story, not a sentence. The kind that stops asking the past to anchor the present. Because the more you demand certainty from memory, the more it breaks under pressure. But if you release it, if you say, this is how it felt, that much is real to me, then you stop fighting. Then you find peace in presence, not proof. Because maybe realness isn't about confirmation. Maybe it's about resonance. About trusting what echoes in your body more than what can be verified by others. Because truth is not just what happened, it's what stayed. And what stays is what shaped you, even if it can't be proven, even if it only lives in you. That doesn't make it false, that makes it yours. And maybe that's all you ever needed. The silence misread loop. They didn't reply. No message, no call, just silence. At first, you tell yourself it's nothing. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they'll respond later. But time passes. Minutes stretch into hours, hours into days, and the silence, grows teeth. You start imagining. Maybe they're mad at you. Maybe you said too much, or not enough. Maybe you crossed a line you didn't see. Maybe they're pulling away, slowly, so you won't notice until it's final, and that maybe becomes meaning. This is the silence misread loop. It starts with absence, but the absence doesn't stay empty for long. Your mind rushes in to fill the void, because silence is unbearable when you care, and the human brain hates loose ends, so it begins to weave a story. At first, it's cautious. You review your last message, reread it, dissect your tone. Did that emoji sound passive-aggressive? Was the timing off? Did they see something in your voice you didn't mean to show? You think you're being thoughtful, analytical, self-aware, but you're not analyzing reality. You're feeding a story, because silence is a blank page, and your insecurity is the pen. So you write, and rewrite, and replay the moment again and again. Each time you tell it, the story sharpens, becomes more vivid, more convincing, until the imagined explanation feels more real than the person themselves. And still, they don't reply. So now it's not just a story, it's a loop. You swing between confusion and conviction, between doubt and certainty. 1 hour you think you're overthinking, the next you're sure something is wrong. And the worst part? You start rewriting history to match the silence. You question past conversations, reinterpret old looks, start seeing clues where there were none. Your brain turns detective, except the crime was never real, but the feelings are. And those feelings, paranoia, anxiety, shame, don't just live in the mind. They settle in the body. Your chest tightens, your stomach turns. You check your phone again and again. Even when you know nothing's changed. This isn't about logic. It's about vulnerability. Because silence doesn't just suggest distance. It suggests rejection. And rejection triggers something primal, a fear wired deep in our nervous system. To be ignored is to feel invisible. To feel invisible is to feel erased. And that pain, it doesn't just echo, it compounds. So you start preparing defenses, emotional armor. You decide what you will say if they ever do respond. Maybe you'll act cold, pretend you didn't care. Or maybe you'll confront them. Or maybe you'll just disappear first. But all of this is happening in your head, while in reality, it's still just silence. That's the trap. You mistake absence for information. You treat quiet as confession. And in doing so, you let someone else's inaction dictate your reality. So, how do you break the loop? You start by separating silence from meaning. Not every pause is a verdict. Not every delay is judgment. Sometimes people are lost in their own noise, their own doubts, their own spirals, just like you. And sometimes, they just don't care as much as you hoped. But even that doesn't define your worth. The silence speaks about them, not you. What defines you is how you respond to the unknown. Do you collapse into assumptions? Or do you learn to breathe inside uncertainty? You can't force someone to speak, but you can choose what you build in their silence. Will it be a story that poisons your peace? Or a space that reminds you your value doesn't vanish in someone else's absence? Because you are still real, still worthy, even when the screen stays dark, even when the message never comes, even when the story in your head begs to be believed. Sometimes the most powerful reply is the one you give yourself. The mistake replay vortex. It was one moment, one mistake, a misstep, a word said in haste, an action you wish you could pull back into your chest. It was human. It was forgivable. But you didn't forgive. You fixated. You turned that moment over in your mind like a sharp stone, inspecting every jagged edge until your fingers bled. You didn't let it pass. You let it settle. And in doing so, you activated something darker. A whirlpool of obsession, of looping, of internal erosion. Welcome to the mistake replay vortex. It starts with discomfort. You replay the moment not to punish yourself, but to understand. You want to dissect it, to learn, to make sense of what went wrong so you never repeat it. But somewhere in that process, your brain crosses a line. What began as reflection becomes rumination. And that's the point where growth dies and shame takes over. You think you're solving something, but you're actually cementing it. Because the more you replay the mistake, the more it distorts. The memory becomes less about what happened and more about how it feels now. hot, tight, humiliating. You inject new meaning with every pass. I'm careless, I'm broken, I ruin things. What started as an event becomes a verdict. A tiny stumble becomes a collapsed identity. You're no longer the person who made the mistake. You become the mistake itself. And the shame, it doesn't just sit quietly. It speaks. It tells you to stay small, to stay silent. It whispers, remember what happened last time you tried? You're not someone who gets it right. You're the one who fumbles. And even when the world moves on, when the people involved have forgiven or forgotten or healed, you haven't. Because the echo inside you is louder than the event ever was. That's the cruel nature of the vortex. It magnifies, and it isolates. You stop reaching out. You fear being exposed again. You brace yourself in advance for failure, sabotaging new chances before they begin. You think you're protecting others from your flaw, but really, you're protecting your identity from change. Because if you moved on, you'd have to let go of the story, the one that says, this is who I am now, the one who messed up. And here's what makes it harder. The vortex feels righteous. You think obsessing over the mistake is a form of accountability, that it proves you care, that it makes you a better person. But shame is a poor teacher. It doesn't guide, it corrodes. Real accountability is rooted in action, change, repair, not internal torment. But the vortex disguises itself as virtue. So you stay. You loop. You suffer in silence because it feels like growth. But it isn't. Because while you're replaying that one moment, life keeps moving. Opportunities pass, joy dulls, relationships weaken. Not because of the original mistake, but because you never came back from it. You built a home inside your guilt and forgot how to leave. So, how do you escape? Not by forgetting, not by pretending it didn't happen, but by changing your relationship to it. Step 1, name it as a vortex. Not a reflection, not a lesson. A vortex. That means you understand this isn't clarity, it's compulsion. And it doesn't end by thinking harder, it ends by stepping out. Step 2, extract the truth, but leave the poison. What did you do wrong? Be honest, but stop there. You don't need to bleed for it daily. Take the insight. Apply the lesson. That's where the process ends. Anything past that is emotional self-harm in disguise. Step 3. Speak it aloud. Shame shrinks in the light. Share the mistake with someone safe, not to be absolved, but to be mirrored, to be reminded that you're still lovable, that mistakes are normal, that you're not the monster your inner voice paints you as. And step 4, the hardest. Move forward without needing to feel fully forgiven first. You may not feel ready. Do it anyway. Because waiting for your feelings to change before you change your life is another loop, another delay. Action creates new evidence, new identity, new echoes. You don't earn your way out of the vortex by rehashing the past. You build your way out. One day, one choice, one step that says, that mistake is a piece of me, not the whole of me. Eventually, the replay slows, the sharpness dulls, the echo fades, and in its place grows something quieter. Not pride, not forgetfulness, but peace. The kind that says, yes, I hurt. Yes, I failed. And yes, I still deserve to live forward. The identity versus expectation. Spiral. You want to be yourself. That seems like a simple, noble goal. To live authentically, to speak with your own voice, to move in the world as someone real and undistorted. But very early, long before you understood the weight of that desire, you learned that being yourself came with consequences. So you adjusted, a little at first. You laughed when something wasn't funny. You nodded when you disagreed. You hid the parts of you that were too much, too sensitive, too angry, too curious, too loud. You changed your clothes, your voice, your posture, and when people responded more favorably, when approval came faster, you learned the lesson. They like me better this way. This is the beginning of the identity versus expectation spiral. It's not a mask you put on. It's a mask that slowly grows into your skin. You don't change all at once. You shift by degrees. At first, it's subtle, like leaning a little more toward the version of yourself others find easier to love. But then you notice the rewards. They smile more, invite you more, praise you more. You feel connected, validated, wanted. And so, you shift again, and again, until one day, You're living as a version of yourself that fits so well, you almost forget it's a performance. But then something breaks. Maybe it's quiet, like exhaustion after socializing, or the ache of hearing yourself laugh and not recognizing the sound. Or maybe it's loud, a panic attack, a sudden resentment, a moment of complete numbness where you feel like you've vanished. Either way, the question surfaces, uninvited. Who am I when I'm not performing? And now the spiral reveals itself. Because the more you try to return to yourself, the more you realize you don't know what that means anymore. The expectations of others have wrapped around you so tightly that even your most honest impulses are suspect. Do I actually want this? Or have I just learned to want it because it keeps the peace? Is this my desire, or is it just another disguise to earn affection? Even rebellion can become a role. You try to assert boundaries, but in a way that won't upset anyone. You try to speak your truth, but only if it's palatable. You long to be seen, but not if it risks being misunderstood. So you perform authenticity. You present curated pieces of your real self, hoping someone will notice, will affirm it, will say, yes, this is the real you, and we still accept you. And when they don't, you spiral again. Because now you've lost twice, once by performing, and again by not being received when you dared to stop. This isn't vanity. This is survival. You were built to adapt. As a child, your safety depended on it. And over time, those adaptations became identity. You stopped drawing attention to your needs. You dimmed your pain so others wouldn't leave. You became who you had to be to feel safe, to feel loved. And in doing so, you unknowingly traded parts of yourself for proximity. But that trade has a cost. The longer you orbit others' expectations, the more disconnected you become from your own center. Your internal compass spins wildly, trying to point home, but too many magnets have been placed around it. Parents, partners, friends, social scripts, cultural ideals, algorithms, each one pulling your true north slightly off course. Until finally, you wake up one day and say, I don't know who I am anymore. And that realization isn't weakness, it's awakening. It's the first breath after years of holding yourself in. But rebuilding a self isn't a snapback moment. It's not about throwing off all expectations in one heroic gesture. It's slow, messy, frightening. Because you will disappoint people. They will miss the version of you they knew, the one that made them comfortable. They might say, you've changed. And you'll want to say, no, I'm just remembering. And in that remembering, grief will come. Grief for all the times you abandoned yourself, for the moments you laughed too quickly, agreed too easily, stayed too long. For the years spent being the strong one, the nice one, the quiet one, the successful one. Grief for the intimacy you never received, because no one ever met the real you. But grief is a sign of life. It means something is returning. And if you stay with it, if you listen gently without rushing, the spiral begins to slow. You stop reacting. You start choosing. You feel fear and still speak. You feel doubt and still stay true. You feel the pressure to become small again, and you don't. You begin to draw boundaries not as walls, but as outlines of your truth. You let people misunderstand you. You let silence replace approval. You let old roles die. And what remains underneath the wreckage of performance is something fierce and tender and utterly human. You. Not the ideal version. Not the edited profile. Not the person shaped by 1,000 expectations. Just you. Flawed. Shifting. Real. And that version of you doesn't need to be understood by everyone. They just need to be home to you. The doubt reassurance addiction. It starts small. A question. A flicker of doubt. Did I lock the door? Did I say the wrong thing? What if I made a terrible mistake? And with it comes discomfort, anxiety, a sense of looming wrongness. So, like anyone would, you seek reassurance. You check the door. You reread the message. You ask a friend, that wasn't weird, right? And they say, no, you're fine. Relief floods in. For a moment, it works. The storm quiets, your chest softens. You feel safe again. But the silence doesn't last. Because soon the thought returns. A new angle, a new what if, a new doubt. And now, you need another fix. This is the doubt reassurance addiction, a psychological trap where every attempt to silence fear only feeds it. where every moment of clarity becomes a prelude to the next panic, and where reassurance stops being comfort and starts becoming a drug. You don't realize it at first, because reassurance feels good, innocent, human. Who doesn't want to be told they're okay? But over time, it becomes compulsive. You stop trusting your own judgment, you stop believing your own memory, and you start outsourcing your sense of safety to anyone who will offer it. Friends, strangers, the internet. But the more you reach outward, the less you trust inward. And now, you've built a loop. Fear, reassurance, relief, repeat. And with every repetition, your mind forgets how to soothe itself. You become a question with no anchor, because doubt is no longer a visitor. It's a tenant. Let's make it real. Robbie worries he offended his coworker. He replays the conversation. Texts a friend. Did that sound off to you? The friend reassures him. He exhales. But later that night, a new question comes. What if they were just being nice? What if I crossed a line? He checks the coworker's social media. Nothing unusual. Still, the doubt lingers. He texts again. It never ends. Or think of Sarah, who obsesses over health. One headache and she's spiraling. What if it's serious? She Googles, asks forums, talks to a doctor. They say it's nothing. She feels better for a day. Then the ache moves, or comes back, or doesn't. And suddenly she's back online, back reading symptoms, back trying to claw certainty out of a world that can't promise it. Because that's the real heart of this addiction, the craving for certainty in an uncertain world. But here's the truth. Reassurance doesn't create safety. It only pretends to. It's like drinking salt water when you're thirsty. You feel quenched for a second. But it only deepens the need, because reassurance doesn't deal with the root. It just distracts from it. And the root is this. What if I can't be sure? What if no one can? What if some questions have no answers, only tolerance? That idea is terrifying, but it's also freeing, because it means you can stop chasing perfect certainty and start building trust, not in the world, not in other people, but in your capacity to face discomfort without collapsing, to feel the panic and still stand, to not know and still move forward. That's strength, not never doubting, but learning not to be ruled by it. So what's the way out? First, notice the urge, the second you feel it, that desperate pull to check, to ask, to get the fix. Pause. Not to shame yourself, but to see the pattern, to say, this is the addiction talking. Then breathe. Let the question hang, unresolved. Let the discomfort rise without scrambling to fix it. Let the doubt sit beside you, and slowly, you'll teach your brain that uncertainty is not an emergency. It's just a shadow. And you are not made of glass. You are not broken because you don't know. You are not unsafe because you feel unsure. You are human. And the moment you stop chasing reassurance like a cure, you begin to remember something deeper. You can live without knowing. You can survive the storm. And you don't need to check the door 5 times to prove it. You just need to trust the one who closed it. The progress contradiction trap. You grow. You change, you unlearn, you soften, you sharpen, you rise, you stumble, and somewhere along the path, you realize you're not who you were. And at first, that feels like victory, like proof of progress. You look back at your old self and see someone smaller, someone reactive, someone unsure, someone you've outgrown. But then the confusion creeps in, because now that old self feels fake, the things you believed, the people you trusted, the choices you made, they don't make sense anymore. And the more you reflect, the more that version of you feels like a stranger, like a lie you accidentally told the world for years. And still, you can't fully claim your new self either, because it's not solid yet. It's still forming, still uncertain, still full of cracks. You say you've changed, but you don't quite trust it. You say you've grown, but part of you wonders if you're just wearing a better mask. So you hesitate. You cling to the old while stepping into the new, 1 foot in memory, 1 foot in hope. That's the progress contradiction trap. The strange, quiet tension between who you were and who you're becoming, where neither feels fully real. Your past self now embarrasses you, but your present self doesn't feel earned. You feel like an imposter in your own evolution. and you don't know where to stand. You look at old pictures and cringe, old messages and flinch, old dreams and feel disconnected. You say, "How did I ever believe that?" But then someone compliments who you are now, and you flinch again. Because deep down, you know how recent the change was. You know how easily you could slide back. So even your growth feels suspicious. You narrate your transformation, but you don't believe it. You share your insight, but it feels borrowed. You want to be seen as wise, but fear being exposed as new. And now you live in the gap between identities, where nothing feels stable, where you're too far from who you were to return, but not far enough from it to feel free. So you try to bridge the gap with stories. You say, "I've changed, and here's why." You construct timelines, you name your turning points. You define your past self like a character in a book, clear, distant, closed. But real change isn't clean. It's messy. It's recursive. It loops back. It pulls you into flashbacks, into old habits, into moments where you suddenly are that old version again. And when that happens, you feel like a fraud. Because now, not only do you mistrust your past self, you begin to mistrust your growth. You ask, "Was I ever truly real?" And that's where the trap tightens, because you start to believe there's no version of you that was, or is, genuine. You question whether your past self was performative, and whether your current self is just another performance in progress. So what do you trust? Not the past, not yet the future, not even the present. Just motion, just the movement, just the unfolding of selfhood in real time. Because the contradiction is not a flaw in your growth. It is your growth. The fact that you feel torn between versions of yourself is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of transition. And transition always feels like a lie, because you haven't landed, but you can't go back. So maybe the answer isn't to pick a version of you to defend. Maybe it's to hold them both. To say, "Yes, I was that. Yes, I am this. No, neither was fake. No, neither is complete." Because identity isn't a fixed state. It's a dialogue between your memories and your intentions, between your regrets and your corrections, between your history and your possibility. And you get to honor them both. You get to say, "I was wrong," without invalidating the self who tried. You get to say, "I'm growing," without pretending you've arrived. You get to be real, even in contradiction, especially in contradiction. That's not inauthenticity. That's evolution. So let the old you breathe. Let the new you wobble. You don't have to trust either fully. You just have to keep becoming. Because the realest version of you is the one still in motion. The logic collapse, loop. You want to understand. You want things to make sense. So you reach for logic, again and again, like a flashlight in a dark room. You tell yourself that if you can just figure it out, you'll feel better. You'll find peace. You'll stop hurting. But some things don't make sense. Some things don't follow rules, don't obey reason, don't resolve with clear conclusions. They just are. And the more you try to pin them down, the more they dissolve under your grip. Still, you try. You replay conversations, analyze behavior, build theories. Why did they do that? Why did this happen? What was the hidden meaning, the motive, the lesson? You don't realize it yet. But you're not seeking answers anymore. You're seeking relief. And that's when the loop begins. This is the logic collapse loop. It starts with a desire for clarity, but ends with confusion born from the search itself. You think logic will untangle the knot, but some knots get tighter the more you pull. You try to reason your way out of heartbreak, out of betrayal, out of grief. You want pain to be neat, predictable, explainable, but some pain doesn't have an equation, and logic, beautiful, sharp, reliable, can't solve what lives outside of structure. It wasn't made for chaos, for contradiction, for emotion that defies the categories you built in your mind. So you overthink. You pile one theory on another. You loop through what-ifs and maybe-thens. You build explanations that crumble as fast as you create them. And now, you're not moving forward, you're spinning in place. You're drowning in the very tool you trusted to save you. And still, you can't stop. Because stepping away from the analysis feels like surrender, like failure, like ignorance, like chaos wins. But the chaos isn't winning. It's always been there. You just finally stop pretending that logic alone could keep it out. You don't want to be irrational. You don't want to let go of structure. So you keep applying formulas to feelings, blueprints to human behavior, algorithms to loss. But every time the pattern breaks, your mind fractures a little more. And what began as a search for understanding becomes the very cause of confusion, because not all answers live in language. Not all closure comes with clarity. Some truths are emotional, intuitive, wordless. And when you try to make them fit into logic's tight spaces, they collapse. Not because they're false, but because they're too big. So what do? You learn to pause the pursuit. You let the question exist without rushing toward the answer. You allow space for the unexplained, not as failure, but as mystery. You stop using logic as a shield and start using presence as an anchor. You remind yourself, I don't need to understand everything to move forward. I don't need to decode every silence, justify every feeling, or solve every loss. Because sometimes, peace isn't in the answer. It's in the willingness to stop asking. That's not ignorance. That's wisdom. Wisdom knows when to analyze and when to let go, when to question and when to breathe, when to stop turning the wheel that spins you deeper into uncertainty. You are not a machine. You are not a formula. You are a being that feels, that mourns, that loves, that wonders, and some of those things will never add up. That's okay. The loop ends when you stop demanding logic from things that were never meant to be logical and start allowing the truth to be felt, even if it can't be fully explained. The attraction-aversion cycle. You feel the pull. It's magnetic, unmistakable. Something or someone grips your attention in a way you can't explain. You're drawn in, almost against your will. It excites you, unnerves you, accelerates your pulse. And in the next breath, you retreat. You flinch. You shut the door, you ghost the call, you push it away. Then comes the emptiness. The aching space where that thing used to be. You miss it, crave it. So you return, chasing what you just rejected, and the cycle starts again. Welcome to the attraction-aversion cycle. It isn't just indecision, it's deeper. This is the loop where desire and fear lock arms, spinning you in place. You want it, but wanting it exposes you. You need it, but needing it feels dangerous. So you oscillate, one moment on fire and the next frozen, one foot reaching, the other dragging. And you tell yourself it's about clarity, that you're still figuring it out. But truthfully, you're caught in the pendulum swing between vulnerability and protection, because the things that attract us often mirror our hidden fears. That person who sees you deeply, you long for their gaze, but it terrifies you. Because if they see the real you, they might walk away. That opportunity that calls to you, it stirs your potential, but stepping into it means risking exposure. That passion project, it ignites something true, but what if you fail? What if you succeed and it changes everything? So you inch forward and your nervous system yanks you back, not because you don't want it, but because your body believes safety lives in avoidance. Desire feels like danger, and safety feels like silence. So your life becomes a stutter. Yes, no, yes, no, like waves crashing into themselves. The cycle seduces you with control. When you pull away, it feels like self-respect. When you return, it feels like destiny. But beneath both is fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being hurt, fear of having to change. You push love away and call it standards. You chase what rejected you and call it courage. But really, you're stuck in a loop not because of what you want, but because of what you believe you'll lose once you have it. You say, I just need more time to be ready. But often, you're not preparing. You're stalling. You're managing internal chaos by external action. The reaching and retreating becomes emotional choreography. It gives the illusion of movement, but you stay in the same emotional room, rearranging the furniture, never walking through the door. And here's where the loop tightens. The more times you swing back and forth, the harder it is to trust your own motives. You don't know if you truly want something, or if you just miss what the absence symbolizes. You don't know if you're rejecting it for good reason, or just responding to the echo of old wounds. The attraction feels real. The aversion feels real. But neither is rooted in peace. Neither feels safe. They just alternate endlessly. So, what are you really chasing? Not the thing, not the person, not the outcome. You're chasing relief from your own ambivalence. You want desire without danger, intimacy without exposure, success without pressure. You crave the feeling of fullness, but only if you can keep one hand on the eject button. That's not love. That's not alignment. That's trauma management. So, how do you stop the pendulum? Not by forcing a decision, not by pretending you're ready, but by stepping outside the swing and asking gently, what am I afraid this will cost me? Not what do I want, but what do I fear losing once I have it? Freedom, identity, control? Will they stop loving me once I'm open? Will I stop feeling like myself if I commit? Will this success make me responsible in ways I'm not ready for? These are not questions of the thing you want. They're questions of who you'll have to become to hold it. And sometimes the answer will be, not yet. And that's okay. But if the answer is yes, if you know in your bones that you want it, then you have to stop pretending you're waiting for a sign. You're not. You're waiting to feel 100% safe. And that moment may never come, because desire always carries risk. That's the cost of wanting something real. The moment you stop running from that risk, the swing slows. The cycle softens. You start acting. Not from panic, not from absence, but from clarity. You choose with both hands, not one hand on the door. And that choice feels different. It's not urgent, it's not euphoric. It's still solid, a yes that doesn't shake. And when aversion creeps back in, as it will, you don't flinch. You meet it. You say, I see you. I know why you're here. But you don't get to steer anymore, because now you know the truth. Fear is not the same as intuition. Missing something is not the same as needing it. And love, real purpose, real alignment, is not found in the chase. It's found in the staying. The meaning crisis spiral. You begin with a question, an ache that won't leave you alone. What is the purpose of all this? Not just your job, your habits, your relationships, but existence itself. Why are we here? What's the point of all this effort, this struggle, this repetition? Why does the world move with such noise, and yet feel so hollow when you stop to listen? So you search. You read, reflect, reach inward. You find an answer that comforts you for a while. Maybe it's love, maybe service, maybe creation, or simply presence. For a time, it gives you peace. You carry it like a lantern through the dark. But then, something shifts. That answer, once radiant, starts to dim. You catch yourself going through the motions again. The peace it gave you becomes routine. The fire cools. And now the spiral begins. You question the answer. Was it too simple? Was it just emotional convenience? A lie you wanted to believe because the truth was too empty? You feel embarrassed that you ever clung to it so tightly, so you drop it, let it go. And the void returns, but you can't live in a void, so you search again. You find a new meaning. Maybe this one is more refined, more nuanced. You feel wiser this time. You say, I've matured. I've outgrown shallow truths. And for a while it works. Until it doesn't. Until that too starts to crack. And once again, the crisis returns. This time deeper, quieter, more despairing. This is the meaning crisis spiral. The pattern where every answer, no matter how profound, eventually gives way to new doubt, where purpose itself becomes a moving target. Each layer of insight reveals a deeper layer of uncertainty, and you're never standing still. You're orbiting a center that refuses to hold. The trap isn't in the search itself. The trap is in the belief that there is a final answer, that one perfect meaning will end the hunger forever, that if you just find the right philosophy, the right role, the right passion, the right God, you'll be cured of the ache. But the ache doesn't come from not knowing. It comes from needing knowing to be fixed. Because meaning isn't a puzzle to solve. It's a process you live inside. You don't find purpose. You make it. And even that making is fragile. What gives you meaning at 20 might feel irrelevant at 30. What moves your soul today might become your cage tomorrow. And that's not failure. That's growth. But we're not taught that. We're taught that purpose should be singular. That once you know it, you're done. That people with real meaning walk with conviction, never waver, never return to the question. So when you doubt again, you feel defective, lost, spiritually broken, and the spiral tightens. You try to numb it, distract yourself, become busy, productive, helpful. You bury the existential tension beneath a pile of checklists. But in the quiet, it always returns. And when it does, it doesn't just question your life. It questions you. Who are you without a clear purpose, without a direction, without a philosophy to shield you from the absurd? You're afraid the answer might be nothing. But that's not the truth. The truth is, you are a being capable of holding contradiction, capable of living with open questions, capable of loving life even when it refuses to explain itself. And in that capacity, that is where meaning lives. Not in certainty, but in presence. Meaning doesn't always arrive as clarity. Sometimes it shows up as awe, or attention, or grief, or the simple act of noticing the sky change color. Sometimes it's not in the answer, but in the fact that you care enough to ask, that you keep showing up anyway, that you refuse to let numbness win. And maybe, just maybe, the crisis itself is sacred. Not a flaw in your design, but a feature. A spiritual engine that ensures you never settle for a life unlived. A hunger that keeps your eyes open, even when it hurts to look. Yes, the spiral will return. You'll find new truths and outgrow them. You'll swear something was real, then doubt it. You'll search and collapse and rise again. But each turn brings you closer, not to finality, but to a deeper intimacy with existence. And that intimacy is not a conclusion. It's a way of being. You are not meant to solve the mystery. You are meant to stand in it, wide-eyed, hollowed out, and finally, alive.